Welcome everybody back into Nerd Sesh. As always, I'm Carson Breber and alongside me is Logan Camden. And today we are going to embark on a very fun journey that'll basically be taking up the next week of our show. We've been hinting at it for a while, but here we are. We've got just under a month until playoff basketball starts. So before we get into that real final crunch time of the regular season, we are going to be ranking our top 30 players in the NBA. We are not going to do that all in one episode because we would die of exhaustion. We're going to do numbers 30 through 21 today, and we'll acknowledge some honorable mentions too. We are considering injured players for this list. So with that said, Logan, would you like to just sort of offer a brief insight into how you viewed this list and what your criteria really was?
I ranked the 30 best basketball players alive.
Hard as hell. I agree. I think that the same things that I favored for this list, I always favor when we talk about the best players in the league. But I do think that I lean more on guys who have that ability to scale alongside other really good players, basically who have ceiling-raising traits. And of course, as always, when we are talking about the best guys, those are the best guys in terms of driving winning. It is not about putting up box score numbers. It is about the impact that you have towards the ultimate goal of winning as many basketball games as we can, and specifically, ideally, winning the title. I think we're aligned on that. So before we get in to number 30, who were some of your toughest cuts, Logan? Because when I really sat down and went through the names on this list, I felt like there were at least 35 guys I wanted in my top 30, but didn't have spots for all of them.
I'm glad you bring up the ceiling point because there is a ceiling versus floor dynamic with a lot of these guys where I feel like I did go with the number one instead of a number two option in certain instances, even though I do prefer the other skill set. So there is a little bit of that dynamic at play, but I think for the most part, I went with the better players. My toughest cut, honestly, Carson, was a player that I'm really, really fond of, and I think is having an awesome year this year. It's Pascal Siakam, and I thought Siakam was going to be a lock for my top 30. I really considered him, honestly, in between 27 and 30, all of these spots, but there's a certain position that I have a lot of players in this range, and Siakam's so damn good, dude. He does so many things at a high level. He's been one of the best transition scorers in all of basketball this year. He's been an elite defender. He's been an elite post scorer. Like, I just think Siakam does so many winning things and so many connective things that you want out of your number two. That being said, when I looked at him in this context, I favored guys that I could see more easily in that number one role, and that's the interesting dynamic to me because I think I would take Pascal on my team over some of the guys that I ranked above him, but I ultimately decided to go with other guys. So Siakam, in my opinion, was my toughest cut. I will let the cat out of the bag. We are considering injured players. I don't have Joel Embiid. I don't have Kawhi Leonard, and the reason why I do that, and I've been consistent with this opinion for about a year or two now, they're spoiled goods to me. They're guys that I just don't want on my roster. Kawhi, I think, is slowly regressing, and I think we've seen a little bit of that this year athletically. I don't think he's falling off a cliff anytime soon, but I just don't want him. I can't bank on the guy being healthy in the playoffs, and to me, that's a complete deal breaker. Joel Embiid, the Philadelphia 76ers are considering a medical retirement for the guy, and he didn't look good when he was available this year, and so I don't want him on my team. I look at those guys as spoiled goods. So I think Siakam was the toughest cut that I had as a healthy, available guy, but I didn't include Embiid or Leonard either just because I think the injuries are just too overwhelming right now.
I do have Kawhi on my list. I don't have Embiid here. And the reason that I don't, even though we are including injured players, guys who are out for the year like Kyrie Irving, Victor Wembanyama, De'Aaron Fox, all those guys are eligible for this list, Embiid, I do think, has crossed a different line when you are talking about seriously considering medical retirement. And we saw him for 19 games this year, and I don't think he was a top 30 player in those 19 games, Logan. I mean, he was bad as a shot maker. He was 49% from two. He was under 30% from three. His defense was bad, like way, way below the level we've seen from Embiid previously. Mediocre rim protection and really, really poor defense out in space. And the Sixers were a bad team when he was on the floor. They were 8-11 in games he played. And remarkably, They have a worse net rating with him on the court this year than they do with him off the court. Even as disastrous as they have been in his absence, they were really bad with him too. So I just don't know what to do with him. I have no idea how to evaluate the guy that we saw this year, the guy that we could expect to see going forward, if we ever even see him again. Kawhi Leonard, at least he's playing basketball right now, and he's been playing basketball for an extended stretch this year. Like, that to me is a guy who I can rank. Embiid, I really don't know how I could rank, so I don't have him on my list either. Siakam was a tough cut for me. He was among the first 5 guys left off, but maybe the toughest cut for me, Logan. And I wonder if you have this guy, because I know historically you've been fond of this guy, but I also know that this guy really discouraged you with his start to this year. I really wanted to find a way to get Bam Adebayo on my list, because I think that he's been playing really good basketball as of late. His last 20 games, he's giving you 21, 10, and 4 on 62% true shooting. The 3-ball has actually come along. He's been over 36% from deep on 3 attempts per game in that time. And even over his last 45 games, you're looking at pretty typical Bam Adebayo production, like 18.5, 10, and 4 on 58% true shooting. He just got off to a horrific start to this year. That's why his production overall is below his standard. He's had a good mid-range shooting season and obviously is an elite defender. I don't think that he's at his absolute apex right now defensively. Like, we are at the point where Bam is not a good rim protector, and he's great at everything else. I mean, his switchability is still incredible. His activity on the glass, he's such a smart defender, but he is like way, way below the other elite defensive bigs when you're just looking at rim protection. Players shoot better than their average at the rim against Bam Adebayo. And offensively, I have sort of mixed feelings where I think if you put him with a great pick and roll playmaker, could you unlock him and make him a more efficient player and feed him more easy looks off the roll? I do think that that is definitely possible, and he hasn't had the luxury of playing with one of those guys. At the same time, we have just seen the tendency in his game to become more prone to settling, to start living on more of a jump shot heavy diet, to push his average field goal distance further and further away from the rim, where he just isn't super efficient. And his touch in the paint has its good stretches, but then it also has its bad stretches. So I do think he's limited enough offensively when I compare him to the guy who I put in my number 30 spot, who is also an elite defensive player. Not quite on Bam's level defensively, but better than him offensively. I ended up giving the nod to somebody else.
Yeah, I don't have Bam on my list, and I have been really high on him. I just think his offensive shortcomings are a little too much to overcome. And I do think he's not a one-man defense, but he's super switchable, can guard 1 through 5. Like, Bam's a special defensive player, but I just continually get more and more frustrated with Bam when you expect him to step into a bigger role. There's been stretches of seasons where I think people can get fooled, and I was one of them that thought maybe this touch is real. Maybe he's going to become a really reliable mid-range shooter and a really good post scorer and a good three-point shooter. And at this point in Bam's career, I'm off that boat. I would, honestly, I'd rather have Ivica Zubac at my center spot than Bam Adebayo.
Stop it. This is Miles Turner over Domantas Sabonis part 2.
There's
no way
Zoo.
You'd rather have Zoo over Bam.
Yeah.
That's crazy. What if Bam Adebayo was playing with James Harden, Logan?
I mean, Big Zoo brings me a lot of that rim protection value, but he actually has something that he can reliably get to offensively. Bam doesn't really have anything that he can get to easily.
He's a 48% mid-range shooter, and I think if he played with an elite pick-and-roll passer, he would absolutely be getting more lobs around the rim, more easy touches off the roll. And defensively, like, yeah, Zoo is a better rim protector. Bam is so much better out in space. Like, Bam is still clearly a top 10 defender on the planet. I mentioned the rim protection thing because I think that's worth noting, and sometimes people overlook Bam's issues there, but he is the most switchable big in basketball, and he can absolutely shut down offenses and stretches with his ability to switch everything. He's the best Giannis defender in basketball by far. Like, he's a game-changing defender.
There's a lot of other guys that bring me a lot of value at the 5 spot that are just better offensive players, and I don't know. I look at that as a real limitation for Bam moving forward. So
would you take Jared Allen over Bam?
Because
I think Jared Allen's better than Zoo.
That's a good question.
I think these are both crazy, by the way. I think Bam is clear of these guys.
Bam's a great defender. I don't want him. He's not a number 2 offensively. I don't know if he's a number 3. Like, Bam might be a number 4 offensively.
He's giving you 21, 10, and 4 on 62% true shooting for 20 games. Last 20 games, he's a really good passing big.
Man.
Listen, man, I'm just saying I think some of the dudes you're trying to put above him are crazy, and they are beneficiaries of their situation. Like Jared Allen, another guy I mentioned, super efficient, great touch, also playing in such a privileged offensive situation. You put Bam in Cleveland with the best pick-and-roll ball-handling duo in basketball, I think his offense would look a good bit better than it does in Miami. It's still not good enough for me to have him on my list. And there were a number of really tough cuts here. I didn't end up getting either Franz Wagner or Paolo Banchero on my list.
Same.
If Franz were shooting the ball better, I think he could be here because I love him as a driver. I really like his playmaking. He's a plus defender. But just the issues he's had shooting the three for the last 2 years now, they do limit his efficiency. They limit his ability to play seamlessly alongside another big wing who needs to have the ball in his hands a lot like Paolo. Both these guys absolutely will be on this list in the future, and Paolo's been playing better as of late, but still the shot selection, the efficiency can be really, really rough, and defensively, he's at best a neutral. So there are just guys who I feel like have those more refined games that are going to lead to high-end winning impact right now compared to a Paolo, even if he has so much ability. I don't have De'Aaron Fox on my list. He had a rough season. I think that when he is as reliant on the pull-up jumper as he was this year, he's just got to be way better at it. There were guys who I felt impacted the game at a high level in multiple ways. And there's a couple other tough cuts who maybe I can get to in direct comparison to a couple of the guys who I chose over them. But again, so much talent in the league today. It's really hard to just pick 30 spots. Shout out Zach LaVine, shout out Tyrese Maxey, shout out James Harden. Bunch of guys who I at least briefly considered. But there's only one guy who can be in the number 30 spot, Logan. Who is that for you?
So I do have Fox on my list. He's going to come in at the number 29 spot, actually. I have Ja Morant at number 30, and I did think about leaving Ja completely off my list in favor of Siakam, just because when we're talking about championship-winning contexts, as a number 2, like, I love Siakam. I just think that if he was tasked with the burden of being the number 1, that he would struggle. But ironically, that's kind of where I also think Ja Morant can struggle a little bit. I think Ja is really polarizing. He's one of the most fun players in the league to watch with his style of play. It's very graceful. It's really beautiful to watch. I mean, Ja flies through the air, has great touch, is a really good finisher, but I do think some of Ja's limitations can kind of get overlooked. My biggest concern about Ja's game and why he can't be higher is his malleability and his portability, and I really favor a lot of the other guards on this list more highly than that because I just think it's a fundamental limiter. I think Ja is one of those guys that needs the ball in his hands, and he's great with the ball in his hands, but I want to be clear about that. I think it's hard for him to scale alongside other offensive players because of that need. He's just a 33% catch and shooter from behind the arc. I think when you watch Ja shoot, I'm never confident that Ja Morant's going to be a really good jump shooter, and it was really encouraging. You remember a couple of years ago, Carson, when we had really started covering the playoffs every single game, going live and stuff like that, and Ja was going off for these huge games against the Lakers. It's like, oh shit, man, if this guy becomes a really elite pull-up mid-range shooter or pull-up three-point shooter, you're looking at maybe one of the best guards in the league because you're going to combine this downhill rim pressure with this elite jump shooting. And I just don't think Ja is ever going to be a good shooter. When I think this is a guy that needs to have his form retooled. He's a 29% three-point shooter this year. I don't like the way his elbow flares out. I think his footwork could use some work. I'm never confident in Ja becoming an elite jump shooter of the ball, and that's a fundamental limiter in him as a team, within a team offense. And I think it's also reflected by the fact that the Grizzlies are better with Ja off the floor with their other two stars. You look at some of the advanced numbers, the Grizzlies have an offensive rating of 115.5 with Ja without Triple J. With Triple J, no Ja, they have an offensive rating that's 3.5 points higher. You do the same thought exercise with Bane, the difference isn't as large, but with Ja, no Bane, they have an offensive rating of 118.5. With Bane, no Ja, they have an offensive rating that's 1.4 points higher. And what I'm saying is Ja's a really good offensive floor raiser, but when we're talking about these ceiling-raising contexts is where I think he has his limitations. I don't think he's as efficient as some of these other point guards. I don't think he scales as well as some of these other point guards. And defensively, he doesn't bring me a ton of value. I don't think he's like a significant negative defensively. I think Ja really works, but he's not a significant plus there. And so a lot of these guys in this range, we're going to have a lot of point guard debates. I don't know if you have a lot of these guys higher. I have a lot of the same positions here. I wondered if Ja was going to make my list. He does. I know a lot of people would probably have Ja as a top 20 player. I don't think he's the best player on the Grizzlies. And
No.
so he's not even my highest Grizzly on this list. I've got Ja at my number 30 spot.
He's not close to my highest Grizzly. In fact, Ja is one of my first guys off the list. I think that this has been a tough year for Ja, and I don't think that people are as high on him league-wide as they were beforehand. I feel like, honestly, most people have come to a pretty similar spot that I've been at with Ja over the last couple years. I do think that he has some serious limitations. He has his superpower with his quickness with the ball in his hands. I mean, it is just supernatural, and his ability to elevate and adjust in the air around the rim, absolutely special. Really, really awesome ball handler as well. Really, really gifted playmaker. The problem is when he's at his best, extremely ball dominant, but when you give him the keys to your offense, he cannot produce efficient enough results to justify just saying, okay, Ja, we're going to put everything in your hands. Like, if you look at 2021 to 2023, those are the years that the Grizzlies offense was just, Ja, run as much pick and roll as you need to get us into our offense every possession. They were a bad half-court offense every one of those years, 17th to 27th percentile every year. You're not going to do anything in the playoffs like that. And that showed. They were the 14th ranked playoff offense out of 16 teams last time we saw them in the postseason. And I think really the major limitation that Ja does have on ball is just the fact that he is such a bad pull-up shooter. And so teams are going to play drop against him every time. And sometimes they'll literally go under screens, which is so rare to see in pick and roll defense today. But if you can bait him into those shots, you're winning every time because he's a 29% three-point shooter. He is a bad three-point shooter who will take those shots if you give them to him, or at least will take them more often than he should. And then even if he gets into that floater range, like, yes, he's got good floater touch, but he's only 44% in the paint outside the restricted area. That number does not stack up to a lot of the high-end guards, so that's more inefficient offense. Like, if you can keep him away from the rim, where he is special as a finisher and he is special as a kick-out passer and a playmaker, then you are going to do well defensively. And we've seen the Grizzlies now actually have a better half-court offense this year. They've been average as a half-court offense as they've shifted more away from Ja, as they've focused more in on finding the weak point defensively and allowing other players to attack with the ball in their hands. But Ja has been worse in that situation. Ja is a bad off-ball player. He is a bad spot-up shooter. He is not a good off-ball mover. He really is a negative player away from the ball. And in spite of him getting worse, the Grizzlies' offense has gotten better by going away from him more. To me, he would just have to be a super valuable offensive number one lead guard to make this list. That's what all of the other guys in this archetype of being ball dominant lead guards, not being high impact defensive players are. They are efficient. They lead to really good team offense in the half court, and Ja isn't doing that. So he's very, very gifted. But with the issues that we've seen from him this year, the rigidity that I have in terms of building around him, if I want him to be at his best, and the ceiling that I think that puts on my team, I left him off my list. And I chose some guys who maybe don't have his raw ability, couldn't be a number one, but they are so much more impactful in their roles as a number two that I want those guys.
I understand that. I do have a certain amount of respect for Ja, though, when it does come to a playoff context where I feel if you don't have that guy that can stay in front of him and can lock him up, that Ja could terrorize your team. Like, he does have those kind of athletic traits that that's why he ultimately did make my list, because I still do feel it's not as consistent. And that's why I would understand you putting somebody else that is more consistent in their role on a night-to-night basis. There's a little bit more volatility there with Ja, and there are more flaws that I think you can expose on the playoff stage. But I do think he has a special trait, and that special trait is that elite speed, that elite quickness, that rim pressure, that ability to get downhill, and that's ultimately why I did decide to put Ja on my list. But he is significantly lower than I think a lot of people would have him within point guard ranks on my list. Like, there are a lot of other guards I still do prefer to Ja.
The efficiency's rough, man. I mean, he's a couple points below league average true shooting, and again, he's just not leading to efficient offense himself. In my number 30 spot, I have a guy who is not nearly as gifted offensively as Ja Morant, but he is such a good all-around winning basketball player, and I do think that he has an ability to play at a higher level than he did at his little slump this year. Who do you think I have?
I don't know. No, I was going to guess Derek White.
Oh, I don't have Derek White this high. No. I mean, I love Derek White. I think that he's somewhere around number 40. I have Jalen Williams here.
Wow.
Yeah. Do you think Derek White is better than Jalen Williams?
They're close for me.
They're not close for me. I do think that Jalen has a lot more on-ball juice and offensive upside, and that's why I do have him here. I think that you can justify that offensive value when you pair it with the elite defensive value that you're getting with him. J-Dub is putting up 21, 5.5, and 5.5 on 57% true shooting this year. Above average efficiency as a pick and roll and isolation creator, though not elite efficiency. But I do think that he is more gifted offensively than maybe the raw production and efficiency would indicate this year, because I think that he had an uncharacteristic shooting slump when you're looking at like December, January. When the three ball is falling, like we know it's capable of, he's a 38% career three-point shooter. He was 42% from deep last year. Like, then he really can be that second option for you offensively, and he's such a damn good all-around player that I want him on my team 10 times out of 10. That being said, I have more offensive questions about him than I do almost anybody else on this list. He is extremely shifty with the ball in his hands, but I think he needs to commit to getting all the way downhill more. He doesn't get to the line at a high rate whatsoever. He's relying on the mid-range too much for my liking, and he's a good mid-range shooter. He's 45%, but it's a lot of tough fallaways, tough mid-range pull-ups, and I think that's why you do see, paired with some of the three-point shooting issues that he had, that the efficiency right now is just league average. But he is a lead in transition. I do think he is a really good playmaker, and the reason I feel comfortable having him here is he's done a better job in the non-Shea minutes on offense as of late. This, for most of the year, has been like the story, the question mark with this team. And there was a time earlier this season where the offense with J-Dub on the floor with Shea off was really, really ugly. And again, that was when he was slumping in December and January. But overall on the year now, they have a 113 offensive rating with J-Dub on with Shea off, which isn't great, but it's decent enough for me to then justify putting him here, because this guy is a first-team all-defense caliber defender. If he gets to 65 games, he is an absolute lock, and that's why I have him here, because that is going to bring me elite value in any situation. I mean, he's just a marvel defensively, because he's a super high-end perimeter defender with lots of on-ball versatility, but it's his off-ball impact and his off-ball versatility that just is different from any other wing or guard in the league right now. People shoot 50% versus J-Dub at the rim. That is the best number of any player 6'6" or shorter to defend at the rim with any sort of actual volume, right? We've seen him anchor their small ball looks at the 5. He's got this 7'2" wingspan and this special athleticism and these special instincts attacking and targeting the ball. That's extremely, extremely impactful when you can be that sort of elite off-ball defender. And that is why, again, I put him over a Bam Adebayo. They're both elite defensive players. I think Bam is more impactful defensively, but J-Dub has clearly more offensive juice. And defensively, right, it's not just what he's doing with the rim protection. He's top 5 in deflections. He is an awesome on-ball defender. He's a 94th percentile isolation defender. So I took him over Bam because I prefer the offensive juice. I take him over Ja because Ja hasn't shown the ability to be a good number 1 on a serious offense. So at that point, I want the elite do-it-all guy who can be my offensive number 2 and one of the best defensive players on the planet. And then I have him over Jaylen Brown. And this was one that I thought was very, very close because I think that they both have their clear advantages. Jaylen Brown is clearly the better scorer to me just because of his physical advantages, right? The efficiency for him has actually been worse than J-Dub, but I do think that Jaylen in most matchups just has an ability to get where he wants. Jaylen Brown, I'm talking about here, and shoot over top of people and bully people. But J-Dub is the much better playmaker, much better ball handler, certainly, clearly the better defender. And Jaylen Brown is an awesome on-ball defender. He really, really is. He is like at best a neutral off-ball defender. I mean, he is a ball watcher. He has lapses, whereas J-Dub is elite there, and that's so impactful in a team context. So, like, if I think about this matchup, who do I think gives the other more problems? I kind of think J-Dub and the collective OKC defense, they can do such a great job on Jaylen that they limit his impact as a scorer. And then on the other end, J-Dub, I think, just out of pick and roll, would be able to get himself a good enough shot diet. He'll be able to play, make, and create for others. He'll be able to have the larger defensive impact. So I ended up going with him. I think that's really close, but I am still a J-Dub believer. Like, he's had his issues this year. The efficiency hasn't been sparkling like it was last year, but I believe when the shot is falling, he is still like the dream number 3, which is what he is for OKC because they're so spoiled, but like really a good offensive number 2 and a dominant defensive player. And that's just a guy who's going to succeed anywhere, in my opinion.
So as a duo, you would have SGA and Tatum above, you would have SGA and J-Dub above Tatum and Brown.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah, I don't have J-Dub on my list. Another stat that you didn't mention that I found when I was researching for these guys, J-Dub the Thunder have a higher defensive rating with J-Dub on and Chet off than Chet on and J-Dub off. Like,
that's crazy.
And it's a decent sample size too because, all the time that Chet was off when it was really J-Dub anchoring the defense. I don't have J-Dub on my list.
A historic defense.
And I understand your argument. There's just way too many offensive questions for me right now about J-Dub. I need to see it in the playoffs, honestly, before I would consider putting him in the number 30 spot. And I do have Jaylen Brown on my list, not that much higher, just a few spots higher. But I do think there's an A1 trait with JB, and it is that mismatch attacking, that is that transition scoring. And that's where I feel like, even though, like in the head-to-head matchup we saw with Oklahoma City where J-Dub doesn't play and Jaylen Brown fouls out, like, that's the floor, I think, for Jaylen Brown, and that was a really, 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 really ugly game. That being said, I know he's gonna physically exert himself on the game, where J-Dub, I've watched games where J-Dub has disappeared offensively, and that just scared me enough to where I left him off this list. But he's not far off. I think J-Dub's within the first 5 to 10 guys off the list for me. It's just... I need to see him have a more efficient run in the playoffs as a scorer before I'm ready to put him in these conversations. But it's a bold take, and one, Carson, that I think could age very, very gracefully depending on what Oklahoma City does in the playoffs.
And that's what I'm betting on, man. Like I said, I'm fundamentally a J-Dub believer. I understand everything that you said. I don't have any problem with you not having him on your list. I mean, he's the last guy on my list. But I do think when the shot is falling, he just does so many things at a high level. I didn't even really touch on his off-ball play offensively, where I think he is so good as a cutter. He is usually a very good spot-up shooter and a great closeout attacker. So, like, he is a really good complement to Shea. And if he can just captain them to respectable offensive results when he's on the floor without Shea, which he's been doing as of late, then I do feel good about having him here on my list. I really, really like his game. I am a believer. And I just value that versatility. And I value that multifaceted impact. And I value how you can impact the game at an elite level, even if you aren't scoring 25 points a game. And I do think J-Dub is one of the best in the league at doing all of that. Who do you have in your 29 spot, Logan? You said it's De'Aaron Fox. Why is he here for you?
Fox has one of those A1 traits that I'm talking about. Ja has the speed and quickness and rim pressure. I think De'Aaron Fox has that speed and quickness. And he's also just way more efficient than Ja. And a lot of these guys in this section, they may not have the most all-around winning impact if their scoring isn't on, but I do just trust them as number 1 lead ball handlers that I don't have to worry about, that they're going to at least be able to take that load and create a decent offense out of it. And Fox is flawed too, right? A lot of the stuff that I mentioned with jump shooting with Ja, I think you can also apply to De'Aaron. I was really encouraged by some of the seasons we've seen in years past where he has been a really good pull-up and mid-range jump shooter. And he's upped his volume there, but he's just not nearly as efficient as he has been. And so I'd like to see him improve in those areas. I still think he's very limited as an off-ball scorer, and as, I'm talking about that malleability and portability with Ja Morant. I think some of those concerns you can copy and paste with Fox. That being said, I do prefer Fox's A1 trait to Ja's, that speed, that quickness. I still think he's with Amen Thompson, he might not be the fastest man in basketball, but he still is one of the fastest men in basketball. And
so is Ja, though.
Yeah, he's marginally more efficient than Ja when it comes to scoring efficiency and turning the ball over. I do prefer that. I think he's a slightly better finisher at the rim. Even though Ja's been statistically a better mid-range shooter, I think that's due to the lack of volume. I think that De'Aaron's just a more consistent mid-range jump shooter. I think he's got better touch in general inside the arc. I really prefer that. He's better at taking care of the basketball. And also, one staggering number about Ja that really scared me. And again, this is like one of Ja's first years back. He only shoots 32% on wide open shots. That's where a defender is within or is 6 feet or further from you.
Yeah.
That was really a terrifying number that I discovered about Ja that almost made me give him the boot.
Well, another number that I should have mentioned, Logan, the Grizzlies' offense has statistically been slightly better with Ja off the floor this year.
And, I mean, it can't be that surprising, too, because you're talking about how they used to run their offense, super heavy pick and roll, Ja dictating every possession. Now it's way more spread out. A lot more guys are involved. It makes sense. That being said, Fox still does terrify me in a playoff setting if I'm the opposing team. If you don't have a guy that can stick with him, he can fry you. I will never forget the Warriors series. I mean, he put the Kings on his back, got them as close as possible, and he's still an elite pick-and-roll ball handler and scorer out of pick-and-roll. Statistically, he's the number 7 pick-and-roll scorer in the NBA. That's minimum 3 possessions a game. He's averaging 1.07 points per possession there, and it's a limited sample size, but in 17 games in San Antonio, minimum 2 possessions a game, he was the best isolation scorer in basketball. I hope that's something that we see continue. He was below league average, I think, in Sacramento, but I also think he was a little bit checked out there. And I don't think he's a defensive plus. De'Aaron Fox frustrates me defensively, even though he's a defensive, I'd say at best, wash. I don't have as many concerns about him as being my number 1 in a playoff series the way I do about some guys that I left off my list. And so a lot of the guys that I have in this range are significantly flawed in one area or the other. They have flaws that I think you can exploit in a playoff setting. That being said, a lot of the guys that I have in this range, I do trust as my offensive engines, as my offensive number 1s, as my primary ball handlers, and that is why they get on the list. And that's why both Ja and De'Aaron are here. They have A1 traits that I believe in a playoff setting. I believe in them as my number 1s to an extent. And if you don't have a guy that can match up with them defensively on the other side, they could crucify you in a playoff series, even though we haven't seen it just yet. So that's why those guys are here for me, and I've got Fox at 29.
I do like De'Aaron Fox. I
Also,
left him just barely off my list. Yeah.
Last thing, I do think this was a down year for De'Aaron, and I think he's going to be better because I was disappointed with the overall output this season.
Yeah, the jump shooting was pretty rough, and that's ultimately probably the biggest reason that I left him off my list, just because I'm very concerned that what we saw from him in 2024 from beyond the arc could just be an outlier season. He took a leap in volume, he took a leap in efficiency, but like every other year of his career, De'Aaron Fox is a 32% three-point shooter, and he was right back down to that this year. So I do really like his mid-range shooting, and he didn't even have a very good mid-range shooting season. He was only 41%, but I think you can bet on him being more in like the mid to high 40s there, which isn't the most efficient, but it's a very valuable shot to have. But I'm really, really worried about his increased reliance on the pull-up jumpers when that's just not what makes him great as a player. What makes him great as a player is first and foremost that threat of downhill pressure, that elite first step, and he has just become more and more prone to leveraging that to say, okay, well, how about I use it to get to my pull-up jumper? Which, when he's nailing his pull-up jumpers, makes him an absolute problem. But when he's not, well, then you get this guy who's inefficient, who isn't a high-end playmaker, who isn't super effective without the ball in his hands, who isn't a super impactful defensive player. And that's where I do feel like there are other guys who do more things to impact the game at a really high level defensively without the ball, without their scoring, who I would lean on over Fox. I'm lower on Fox now than I was at the start of the year, and a lot of that is because of the struggles that he's had as a jump shooter. But that's meaningful to me because that's such a major part of his shot diet now. I still really like him being paired with Wemby. I still think that he's totally on the fringes of this list, but I ended up going with his former teammate in my number 29 spot, Logan. I have Domantas Sabonis here. Would you like to react with rage? He's just disgusted. He won't even speak to me.
I just kind of want to leave for this segment. I don't want to be here for this. This is you put Sabonis on before Bam.
I was conflicted about that, but I just think that Domantas Sabonis is a really awesome offensive player now. And I think that he's gotten better, and I don't think you really give him credit for getting better because I've had my issues with Domas historically in the past. I've had my issues with the fact that he's not an overly skilled post scorer. He relies on brute force down there. And if you can match up with him physically, well, you can stifle him as a scorer. You can maybe force him to commit some offensive fouls. And historically, he has not been a willing jump shooter. And so teams can play off him. And like, yeah, he can still be a really good passing hub for you and an elite screener and bring positive offensive value in those ways, but he's just not going to be a super effective scorer. I think he's gotten better as a scorer. This year he's giving you 20, 14, and 6.5 on 66% true shooting, is an elite screener, is a really good passing big. The Kings run so much offense through him with handoffs, and he's very good spotting cutters. But I think the significant improvement that he's made is as a jump shooter. He went from a guy who last year was giving you a point per jump shot to a guy who is now giving you 1.18 points per jumper. That is absurd. That's, I think, better than a 90th percentile number. Now, are those wide open jump shots? Yes. Is that still on relatively low volume? Yes. But he only needs to make the wide open ones. He's taking more of them, and he's making them at an elite clip. He's over 42% from deep. He's 45% on 2-point jumpers. So he's reached the level now where he's a good enough jump shooter to make me more confident in his scoring translating, in his offensive impact translating to a playoff series. And he's been super impactful this year. The Kings are 8 points per 100 possessions better with him on the floor. When he was on the floor without De'Aaron Fox, they have a 117 offensive rating this year. When Fox was on the Kings, they were significantly worse with Fox on the floor without Domas, then vice versa. And the guy usually never misses games. I mean, Domas has been extremely available, but he did miss some time this year, just came back, and the Kings went 3-6 without him. I also think that he's improved defensively. He plays hard there. He's capable moving in space, and he's not a good rim protector, but he's holding opposing players several points below their average field goal percentage at the rim. That's a decent number for a big. It's not what you want to see from like a high impact defensive big, but I think that it marks improvement for Domas. So he's so productive. He's so efficient. I think that he could thrive alongside a number of different perimeter archetypes. Like basically any sort of ball handler he is going to enhance, if it's as a roller, if it's running handoffs, if it's with his super efficient play finishing, and also maybe the best rebounder in the league. So I do have him here, Logan. I know that you absolutely hate the guy, but he's very good at basketball.
I could never put a center that is this much of like liability and not that great offensively in terms of skill on my list.
I just think that that's crazy.
Whoop-de-doo. Sabonis can hit a jumper now, dude. You're never going to win an actual...
He gives you 20 a game.
You're never going to win anything meaningful with Domantas Sabonis at your 5. Call me when he wins a chip as the starting big man. He's not. He's not going to win a playoff series as your starting 5.
Is De'Aaron Fox going to go out there and win a chip as your best guy? Is John Morant going to go out there and win a chip as your best guy? Of course not. He's not food. He's fine defensively. God, you hate him so much, man. You hate him so much. I will say, my 29 and 30 spots were almost Siakam a tier below the guys who I have.
I would have Siakam over Sabonis.
I don't think that's crazy. I think what's crazy is to act as though Sabonis doesn't belong in these conversations and to act as though you're expecting to like win something like a championship with any of these guys.
I want to say
like
they've had a defensive rating. I think they've had a defensive rating like south of 113 every single year with Domas on the floor. It's like
their defensive rating has been perfectly solid with him on the floor this year. It's better than it is with him off it. By a couple points. He's improved
because they're trotting out Trey Lyles and Jonas Valanciunas.
Yeah, but they're like a
bigs.
Decent defense when he's on the floor. And they're an awesome offense when he's on the floor. He's a good player, man. He makes everybody around him better. I don't disagree with your criticisms of him. I just think you take them too far. And as we remember, you had Miles Turner above him this past offseason. The level of production, the level of efficiency that he gives you, it's rare. And I'm not the highest on him, but I do think that he's a top 114 player.
That's the number. That's the best defense that the Kings have posted with him on the floor since he came to Sacramento.
Well, they've had a whole lot of issues around him defensively, Logan. They have no plus defenders around him besides Keegan Murray, and they haven't for years. I mean, shout out Keon Ellis. He's very solid, but he hasn't started for most of the year. So I think a lot of that is the totality of the situation. I think that Sabonis is fine defensively. Now, that does concern me at the center position. That's why I don't have him higher, but He's certainly better defensively than a center who I have a few spots above him, who is a better offensive player, but I don't think that disqualifies Domas for being on this list. Who's in your 28 spot, Logan?
I'm missing you a technical foul. Unnecessary, unwarranted mention of Domantas Sabonis.
God, man.
All
You
right.
two got to work things out. I don't know what it is.
I don't know. Maybe we'll make up and kiss someday, man.
I'd really like to see that. I'd really like to see that.
At number 28, I have Jaylen Brown, and I know he's not on your list, and I do think that there's exploitable things about Jaylen Brown that scare me. We can talk about that Oklahoma City game again. He's not a good shooter of the basketball. Like, Jaylen Brown, not a good shooter. I don't know if he'll ever be a good jump shooter. Playmaking and ball handling, when he can't get you on, like, his back, or he can't trap you and just manipulate you and spam dribble, he's not a good ball handler. He doesn't have a ton of counters or a diverse offensive game. It's talking about brute force with Domas. I mean, if Jaylen Brown can't just physically overpower you, he's not really a good offensive player. It's the totality, right? Because I think that, again, with some of these other guys that I'm talking about, that they have these A1 traits that I like. And I do think Jaylen Brown does a few things at a very high level that I really value. One, transition scoring. If your team can get stops, Jaylen Brown is a guy that can wreak havoc when he gets out on the break and can just get you easy points that you can't take away. When he does have a physical mismatch on him, he's really good. He's the number 9 post scorer in the NBA this season, minimum 2 possessions a game. He's been really, really good this year. That being said, like I said, I think in a playoff series, there are things that you can exploit with Jaylen Brown. I'm leaving him on an island. When you're thinking about things that you need to counter with Boston, I'm not letting Horford shoot. I'm not letting Tatum shoot. I'm not letting Pritchard shoot. I'm not letting White, Holiday, any of these guys shoot. I'm going to let Jaylen Brown shoot. I'm going to leave him alone. When he gets the ball in his hands, I'm going to try to exert ball pressure and get up in his grill and try to force turnovers. Sometimes, if it's opportune, if it's on the baseline, or if it's near the half court, I might implement traps and doubles and see if I can get him to cough the rock up, because I don't think he's very efficient and good at holding on to the ball. He's got 2.6 turnovers per game this year. When you compare that with other primary ball handlers that just have the ball in their hands more, that's a concerning number to me. And again, there are just things that I would implement that I think makes it easier for him as an offensive player to guard that do scare me in a playoff setting. That being said, really good mismatch attacker, really good post scorer, really physical, great transition scorer, and he's a really, really good man defender, where I think that in certain matchups against big, strong guys, he can take on that matchup, and he can be your lead guy there. Jaylen Brown's an excellent defender. And I will admit, I'm not one of these delusional Celtics fans online that will put him and Tatum as the best duo or elevate him in conversations he doesn't belong in. Part of this is due to a respect thing. He's a finals MVP. He's a champion at this point, and I do feel like I'm not going to value that and say that Jaylen Brown is stamped top 10 or stamped top 20. I do think he's stamped top 30 at this point when you can do that in a playoff run, and I will respect what comes with that. I don't value it as highly as other people do, but I do value it to a certain extent. And I think there's a certain stature that comes with that and that I will respect. So Jaylen Brown, and that's kind of the tier of this list for me. None of these guys are perfect basketball players. There's all flaws that I think are in these guys' games. There's things that you can do to throw them off their game. And so that's where Jaylen Brown falls in for me. He's going to come in at number 28.
It's very fair. I mean, I'm not going to passionately argue for the guy in my 29 or 30 spot over Jaylen. I think that they're all super close. And you're right. I mean, he reached a really impressive level in that finals run last year. Now, I think some people can overlook some of the flaws that he had even in that run, but what he did as an on-ball defender in the finals, what he was able to do as a mismatch attacker throughout that run, very, very impressive.
And the last thing I'll say on it, and this is a blanket statement you could say for any Boston Celtics player, it is so hard to individually evaluate any Celtic that is not named Jason
makes
Tatum.
Everybody look better.
Literally, because it is an optimal situation if you are a good basketball player, because you can just come in and you can be a part of the machine. You don't have to be the machine. You can just be a cog in it, and that is what makes a lot of Celtics hard to evaluate.
What I would say is I'm ranking these players based purely on how good I think they are right now. I totally respect what Jalen did last year. That's not really factoring into my evaluation because I think that the level that he is at a jump shooter right now is deeply concerning. He's a 31% three-point shooter. He's a 38% mid-range shooter. And I think if you can limit his mismatch attacking, which is easier said than done, but we just saw OKC do it, you can give him fits, and his limitations as a ball handler and playmaker and jump shooter and decision maker all can very much be exposed. Compared to J-Dub, that one was really close for me because Jaylen Brown just has certain physical advantage he can weaponize that J-Dub does not. But J-Dub is the more complete player. I think I get more consistent all-around impact from him, and that is what I'm leaning on. But I don't like having Jalen off this list. Like, he is one of the first two guys off, honestly, for me. It was him and Bam, and then Ja. I mean, there's a lot of guys, honestly, who I considered. But Jalen, I really, really did consider up against J-Dub, and I ended up going with Dub. So now I'm into my 28 spot, and I do think that there's a bit of a leap here. I have Trae Young. Trae is having an excellent offensive season, as he always does. He's giving you 24 points, 11.5 assists a game on 56% true shooting with almost 5 turnovers a game. So you have really impressive volume. You do have major efficiency shortcomings compared to other guys on this list, but I think his efficiency sells short how impressive what he's done is because of the high value offense he creates for his teammates. Like, he leads the league by a lot in rim assists. He is one of the absolute best interior passers in basketball. If it's lobs, if it's lay down passes, spotting dudes in the dunker spot, he's just phenomenal there. And because he has been in such a hard offensive situation, like, he has shown several times over what an incredible offensive floor raiser he is. But this year he's shown he can take an offense with 0 clear positive offensive players starting alongside them, and he can get them to play like a 65th percentile offense, which is what they've been when he's on the floor. And like, that has been so impressive all year. He just controls the game so masterfully out of pick and roll, where he's a 76th percentile efficiency creator. He gets to the line at an elite rate still, shoots 46% on floaters on insane volume. That's a weapon. The pace that he plays at, the ability to trap defenders on his back and then just dissect you with his playmaking, which is his superpower. He's always going to get you a decent shot as a team. And you've seen now, like, even as Jalen Johnson went down for the year, then they traded away DeAndre Hunter and Bogey on February 7th. And since that date, Atlanta is an 8-8 team when Trae Young plays. They're an above league average offense when he plays, and he's giving you 26 and 11.5. So, like, his efficiency limitations do exist in a vacuum, and that's part of the reason that I don't have him higher, because when you are talking about portability, scaling alongside other great players in different situations, I mean, Trae is at the absolute bottom tier in that regard. But in terms of offensive floor raising, he truly is one of the best in the league, and their offense has been 7.5 points per 100 possessions better with him on the floor. So as an offensive floor raiser, he is elite. The issues just arise with him with the lack of offensive versatility, the lack of an ability to play away from the ball at a high level, the efficiency limitations that he does have at somebody who is fighting an uphill battle just in terms of other dudes having more physical advantages compared to him. And obviously, he hasn't been a super efficient pull-up shooter this year, and there is some inconsistency with there, even though his range is insane. Just the degree of difficulty on his pull-up jumpers tends to be pretty high, and he'll let some threes rip that very few other guys would attempt. And then obviously, he is a poor defender. I don't think Trae Young is the worst defender in the league, but I do think that he is absolutely one of the worst defensive stars, even though he's improved there. So I love what he brings me with his ability to carry any group to being an above league average offense. But I lean on those dudes who raise the ceiling. I lean on those dudes who can impact the game in multiple ways, in multiple situations. And most of the guys who I have above Trae just have him beat there. That's why I have him here.
This flows nicely. I have Trae in my number 27 spot.
Nice.
I had to put Trae on here when I'm talking about these other guys that are flawed, a Fox, a Ja Morant. I mean, I just feel like Trae leads to more winning offense at a high level. Now, can he disappear in similar ways that those guys can? I think if you force Ja to be a jump shooter, I think if you force Fox to be a jump shooter, I think they can disappear a little bit. And I think Trae is always going to have his efficiency concerns, but he's always going to manufacture high shot quality no matter who's around him. And I think Trae Young is going to make me, how do I phrase this? Retroactively, like, I guess not like appreciate James Harden more, I guess. Because I don't know, watching a lot of Trae clips and looking at the gaudy turnover numbers, I think it's just a byproduct of how much he has the ball in his hands. At like a point where I'm like, you know what, dude, I actually don't care about the turnovers all that much. This guy's always got the ball in his hands. He's always making the decision for the offense every time. He's just naturally going to accumulate them. And so
got to live with it, especially when you consider the alternatives for the Hawks offense.
Exactly. And that's what I was thinking about with Harden. I was like, you know, he wasn't efficient. He did have his shortcomings. He fell a little short. I think I may have been a little too hard on Harden in the past. I think I may be a little too hard on Trae Young in the past. And
it's beautiful. I can't wait until you have this moment with Domas.
It's never going to happen. Because I looked at a number and it blew my mind. Trae Young is averaging the 4th most turnovers per game of any player in NBA history right now in a single season. And I was like, damn, man, can I really have a guy that's that inefficient? And I look at the other guys, and it's Russell Westbrook, and I'm always going to have my issues with Russell Westbrook and his style of play. But then it's James Harden, and then I go,
and
Harden's
George
leading
McGinnis.
I'm like, Harden's leading out elite offenses every year. Trae's leading out elite offenses every year. He's just always got the ball in his hand. And so I was like, I'm not going to hold that against him. I know what he does for a team offense. I'll live with the defensive shortcomings when he can bring me such a high level of offense. And so, yeah, I think Trae needs to be here. I think this is about right. There are guys that aren't as glaring liabilities defensively and that are more efficient. And that's why Trae can't be higher for me. But I think if I'm going to have Ja Morant, if I'm going to have, if I'm going to have Ja Morant, if I'm going to have Fox, I got to have Trae Young. And that's why he slots in at 27 for me.
I think that Trae is pretty clearly better offensively than both of those guys. I mean, just the control of the game, the playmaking, it is so special. And when he is on as a three-point shooter, where he has really had a down year, like, I mean, he can just give you 35 and 15 like that. And it's really, really impressive, the offensive ceiling that he has and the offensive floor that he provides to any team. But he does have other limitations that keep him down here for me. At number 27, I have a guy who, despite being a very different player than Trae in some ways, has a very similar statistical profile to him and also has some of the same strengths and limitations when you just think about like the big picture play style. I have Cade Cunningham here at number 27. And again, they're two very different players in some ways, right? Trae is this small guard, 6'1", 165. Cade is a massive guard, right? He's 6'6", 220. So that's very different. But super ball dominant, low efficiency, high turnover, but also awesome playmakers who are elevating these subpar offensive situations. That describes both Cade and Trae. Cade is giving you 26, 6, and 9 on 56% true shooting with 4.5 turnovers a game. Pretty similar raw numbers to what we just talked about with Trae. And there is a lot to love about Cade's game. I love any big-ass guard. Like, I just think the passing angles available to a guy like that are an advantage for Cade, and I do think that he is a damn good playmaker. He's got great vision. He's got great creativity. I do think he doesn't have elite accuracy as a passer. He also doesn't have elite ball handling, which is where you see those sort of factors combine, and he has the really high turnover numbers, but he gives you 9 assists a game. He's a gifted shot maker. The efficiency isn't great because he does tend to take tougher shots, but he's added a really nice post game, which is a way for him to leverage his strength and then his mid-range shot making. He's improved as a pull-up three-point shooter. I like the pace that he plays with out of pick and roll, where he's a 77th percentile efficiency creator. I really do value his strength. I think that that is so translatable to a playoff environment when people can't knock you off your spots and they can't speed you up. Like, you remain in control and you can still get to the spots that you want, even against physical, high-end playoff defenses. Cade has that going for him, and he's a really good offensive floor raiser. Like, he's improved the Pistons' offense by 7 points per 100 possessions. Where he gets the edge over Trae to me is on the defensive end, because I think that Trae is pretty clearly the better offensive player just because he is such a special playmaker, clears Cade there as good as Cade is. But Cade legitimately, with his size, with his strength, is a very competitive, solid defender. He's an above-average rim-protecting wing. He holds up well on switches against bigger players in the post. And so he's able to be very solid there in a way that Trae just obviously is not. But Cade does have his offensive limitations. He is still a bad finisher in the restricted area. He shoots under 57% there. That's a really, really low number. Still very high turnover numbers, as I mentioned. Still low scoring efficiency overall because although I like his shot making, he doesn't manufacture the easiest looks for himself. And he's not an elite pull-up shooter to the point where, like, okay, that can be the bread and butter of his offensive scoring arsenal. And he is extremely ball dominant. And I do think there are other guys who are much more proven in their ability to play off ball and play alongside other high-end offensive players. So some similarities to Trae. He clears him because of the defense, or I mean, I have him narrowly above Trae because of the defensive edge. I know a lot of people would probably have Cade higher than this. I do think that some of the limitations that he has in terms of efficiency are significant, and I think some people have just undersold the supporting cast around him. Not to say that it's a bunch of world beaters. I think what Cade has done is wildly impressive, but some people try to downplay like the value of going from the hell that the Pistons were in last year, which was truly disgusting what they were making Cade play with, that spacing. It was abysmal, to having an elite shooter like Malik Beasley, to have professional basketball players like Tim Hardaway Jr., to have a really good basketball player like Tobias Harris. Like, that makes a big difference. Cade was playing really good basketball down the stretch of last season, and nobody was talking about it. And now that they've put a professional basketball team around him, he's playing a little better. And he has cemented himself as a top 30 kind of guy, but the perception has totally shifted to now people are like, oh, he's top 10, when situation matters. And I think that that has been reflected in the Cade Cunningham experience over these last couple years.
I think you said it well. We're lockstep right now. I have Cade in my next spot. The one edge I would think I would give Cade over Trae in the long term, this doesn't really necessarily apply to right now, a little bit. I do trust Cade more. I think if he was in a different context, if he was forced to be a number 2 or forced to be a number 3, and the reason I say that, it's not because of the off-ball ability, but, you know, I would still worry about him, like, reliably spacing the floor and finding his shots and stuff like that. But defensively in a team context, I think he translates anywhere. And that's really the edge, just because I think Trae is such a liability that in a playoff context that, you know, he can get picked on. And that applies to another guy that I have on this list, interestingly enough, but I just prefer his offensive game. And I do think he's the number 1, and I think he's more malleable than both these guys in a different context. I figure we'll get to him very shortly.
We'll get to that guy. We'll get to that guy.
I think Cade needs to be higher than him. And I think you hit on a really key part right there. Because he's like the new kid on the block, I think a lot of people look at his raw numbers and they want to elevate him into conversations because they're gaudy, right? The fact that he's near, almost at a double-double with points and assists, and then that he's really high in rebounds, and he's a plus defender. Like, again, I just think it's a little too soon for me. He's not as efficient as I'd like him to be if he's going to be into those conversations as a number 1. I think he's a number 1, but he's not like one of those high-end guys. There's just guys that I think produce better, more overwhelming offensive results.
When it comes to college basketball in March Mania, one thing is for sure. Nothing's for sure. Upsets, buzzer beaters, Cinderella's advancing, top seeds going home early. It's all going to happen. Bet the unexpected, every upset, every day with DraftKings Sportsbook. With live betting, exclusive content, promos, and parlays, DraftKings is the ultimate college basketball destination for March. Ready to make your first bet? Check out the matchups and pick a team to win. It's that simple. And if it's your first time, here's something special just for you. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Bet the unexpected with DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code NERDS. That's code NERDS for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. So, we are in lockstep right now. In my number 26 spot, I have a guy who you actually just compared to Cade on our last show, talking about who you would have higher. You said this guy. I have Jimmy Butler in my number 26 spot. Logan's shocked. Logan expected me to have Jimmy much higher, question mark. I know I've been saying he's a top 25 player, and I have him at number 26, but you'll have to forgive me for that.
Jimmy's just my guy.
Jaw drop.
Jimmy's just my guy.
You're going to have him at number 14 or something crazy.
Number four.
Wouldn't have put it past you a couple years ago with the way you were talking about playoff Jimmy. Definitely wouldn't have put it past you to have him above Jimmy Harden all time. I still wouldn't put that past you. Listen, man, I love Jimmy. And I liked the trade when they made it, and I think that it has been an absolute home run. The Warriors are 14-1 with Jimmy Butler. They're 25-27 without him. I feel like that tells you basically all you need to know about the difference he's made for this team. They're a plus 12 net rating team when he's on the court. Like, he has totally transformed their season, and he is a phenomenal winning basketball player. As I've said many times, he has done whatever the Warriors need from him to have a high winning impact, to fit into this system, into this new motion offense for him. He's been an elite cutting wing. He's been an elite offensive rebounding wing. He's been a willing screener. He can finish off the roll. He can play make off the short roll. He is an awesome passer, and that's been maybe his most valuable offensive trait, just his ability to be that phenomenal connective playmaker and create open shots for teammates. But as a scorer, his most valuable trait has just been his ability to get to the line at an elite rate still, one of the highest rates in basketball. I will say his finishing has been weirdly bad with the Warriors, and I think that that's limited his overall scoring production and efficiency. Like, he's shooting 60% in the restricted area. That was over 70% in Miami. I think that'll get better. I mean, he's just missed some bunnies and some tip-ins and, like, shots you would expect him to make around the rim. And he is still a bucket on ball when you need him to be. He is still a high-end mismatch attacker. I mean, he is this physical, big wing who always plays at his own pace, which, as we talked about, that's so valuable when you get into the playoffs and nobody can bully you and nobody can speed you up. Jimmy is one of those guys. And across Miami and Golden State this year, he's been an 84th percentile efficiency isolation scorer and a 74th percentile efficiency pick and roll scorer. So he has that on-ball juice. He just has to pick his spots with it a lot more, or he has been picking his spots with it a lot more. And he is still a real plus defender. Very high IQ, impactful off-ball guy, makes plays, jumping passing lanes where he has phenomenal instincts, good length, good athlete. I think the box score very much sells Jimmy Butler short. And that's why I thought the discourse about him was absolutely crazy before he got traded to Golden State. People talking about him being washed. People saying, oh, how big is the difference between him and Andrew Wiggins? And I feel like I was one of Jimmy's biggest advocates in that moment. Now Logan's going to come out here and tell me that I'm too low on him. You're a big Jimmy guy, though. You've always been high on him, too. But even though I think the box score does definitely sell Jimmy short, I also have like this conflict between that and then the fact that he has had 6 points or fewer in 3 of his 15 games with the Warriors. And there are nights as a scorer where he really is basically a non-factor. So I'm balancing that elite winning complementary stuff he does with the fact that basically everybody around him is carrying a heavier offensive load. And I mean, the dude I have one spot above him is just such an offensive monster. This is where I felt comfortable landing with Jimmy. I'm going to take him above the guys who are very ball dominant, low efficiency, even though they're better floor raisers and offensive number ones. I'll take Jimmy over them because he's such a good number 2. But everybody above him, I just feel like has like some elite dominant trait that puts them above this version of Jimmy with the limitations in terms of his offensive volume at this age.
Yeah, so I have Jimmy in my number 18 spot.
Wow.
I mean, I've just been impressed at how well he's fit into this. And granted, these numbers, I will say, are a small sample size from what he's been doing in Golden State. He's been the number 3 isolation scorer in basketball since joining the Dubs. He's been the number 7 transition scorer in basketball. He's been the number 1 post scorer in basketball since joining the Dubs. I just
how many possessions is that on?
I mean, it's small, but dude, Jimmy is still going to be a guy that gives you elite defense when he's engaged. He is a smart playmaker. He's so malleable.
Jimmy has 11 post-up possessions with the Warriors.
Dude, he could fit into so many different situations.
100%.
I still think you're low on him. Like, I think this is too low for Jimmy. I would have Jimmy still as a top 20 player in the NBA. It wasn't that long ago. And don't get me wrong. I know that And he's probably going to look better than he would in any other situation. Everybody does alongside Stephen Curry, right? Your job becomes so much easier. That offensive burden is alleviated.
Yeah.
And you can feel burnt by maybe some of the regular season performances and him not playing last year in the playoffs. I just have this ultimate faith in Jimmy Butler that he is going to rise to the occasion, that he is going to play his best ball when you need him to. And I'm just not surprised. Like, I don't think that the regression that people may point to in the regular season is as serious as some of the numbers may indicate. I think Jimmy's a gamer. He's a guy who won the playoffs. He's a guy who won a big stage. He knows what it takes to win. He has a chip on his shoulder. He's a psycho. I want Jimmy on my roster. He's tough as nails. He gives me elite two-way value. And he turns his game up. So we're not actually that far apart. Like, what is this, 6, 7 spots?
8 spots,
eight,
I think.
Eight,
it's probably
eight,
one of
26
the
18.
dudes will be furthest apart on
Probably.
this list.
I agree. I still
Even
think
though
Jimmy's
I love Jimmy.
I think Jimmy's a guy that is going to be there when you need him. And I want him on my team. So he's not going to be on this list for me. He's going to be in next episode's list.
Listen, man. I think I've done nothing but rave about Jimmy Butler. I just think you have more confidence in him, like, really ramping up the scoring volume maybe in the playoffs. Like, I don't really see that. Do I see him going from 16 points per game to 19 or 20? Sure. Do I think you're getting a Jimmy
I go
who's
over
giving you
20.
23?
I go over 20.
See, I just don't see that. And maybe I am currently experiencing the curse of watching too closely, which I do think is a thing in sports. Like, if you watch every game in a regular
100%,
season,
100%.
sometimes you can miss the forest for the trees, right? And you can maybe forget about, like, some big trends that you've seen in postseasons before or what have you. But my feeling right now is that Jimmy is awesome. I don't know that he can turn back the clock to just, like, carry an offense to the point where he's giving you 24, 25 points per game. I wouldn't expect that.
Jimmy's my guy. Jimmy's always been my guy.
He is your guy. He is your guy. So, who is in your 25 spot, Logan?
Your guy, actually. I'm interested to see how much higher you have this young man. I have Darius Garland in my 25 spot.
Ooh, interesting. That's not who I thought you were going to say when you said my guy. I have Garland on this list, but a few spots higher.
Interesting.
I have him in my 22 spot.
And so I have Garland above Cunningham and Trae Young, and I think it may surprise people because they look at Cade's gaudy numbers and they're blown away by them. I think Darius is way more efficient. I think he's a better scorer. I think he's a better shooter. And again, the numbers aren't going to indicate that he averages 5 points per game less. But what I mean by that is he averages 2 turnovers less per game. I think that's one. I think Garland's just a more efficient guy, but he also doesn't have as many ball handling duties. You know, it's spread between him and Donovan Mitchell. I think that's important to mention. But it is Darius's portability that I really, really bank on. Like, the guy's a 40% three-point shooter. He's a really good pull-up shooter. He's great at a pick and roll, great off of handoffs, in the intermediate. Like, I think Garland's a really special offensive basketball player and can kind of get lost in the mix in Cleveland with Mitchell, with Mobley, with Jared Allen. Darius Garland's really, really good. Just looking at scoring, he's been the number 11 pick-and-roll ball handler scorer in the league this season. He's been the number 12 scorer out of handoffs. And so, yeah, I like his malleability. I like his portability. And I think he's a better offensive player than Cade, than Trae, than Fox, than Ja. Again, the numbers aren't going to back that up when you're looking at them in the raw, but he's a better shooter than all those guys to me. He's got better touch than all those guys. And he's a crazy good ball handler. He's one of the best ball handlers in basketball. I think he's an underrated playmaker. And the number that you brought up throughout the season, Carson, that really hammers home this point, you give the guy smart role men, good shooters around him, he's going to make great offense regardless of, you know, if there's stars on the court alongside him or not. With Mitchell without Garland, this is a team with an offensive rating of 121.5. With Garland without Mitchell, that number balloons by 5.2 points. I think Garland's really damn good. Now, the reason I would hear an argument for him lower on this list, or maybe if you don't want to have him on this list at all, is the defensive liability that he is, because I think Trae Young is a massive defensive liability. I still think Garland is when we're talking about these high-end contexts. And it's sad, man, because, look, as a small guy that plays a lot of basketball, I do empathize with Darius Garland's situation. Like, it just sucks. Sometimes you're going to get a big dude on you in the post, and you just can't guard him. Garland tries his ass off. I've never seen the guy lack for effort or care or heart. most of the time he's just at a physical disadvantage where he can't really affect the play. And so I will hold that against him. That's ultimately what limits him from being higher on this list for me. But I think you're getting one of the most special offensive players in the game today that could fit in a myriad of different offensive situations as your lead ball handler and guard or as your second ball handler and guard. Even though we're really high on Garland, I still kind of tend to think he's a little bit underrated, Carson.
Yeah, well, I have him even higher, like I said, up at number 22, and I think that you hit on the exact question that you have to answer with Garland, which is how much do you weight his dominance offensively against his limitations defensively? To me, Garland can be a competitive, fine defensive player in a lot of matchups, and then you get to the big one that Cleveland has to win if they want to win the title, and that is beating Boston, and he is a major problem defensively in that matchup because we know Boston relentlessly targets mismatches more than any other team in basketball, and they're better at it than anybody else, and they are going to go at a small guard like Garland over and over and over again, and they produce elite offensive results when they do that. So in that matchup, it is super problematic. I also think Garland is just so elite offensively that he more than outweighs it to the point where, like, this guy is a top 25 player. He's one of the most special offensive players in basketball. Per 36 minutes, he gives you 25 points and 8 assists on 61% true shooting. Crazy scoring, playmaking efficiency combo. He's generated a 124 offensive rating in minutes he plays with Donovan Mitchell. They have really figured out how to complement each other. Garland is a really good off-ball player. He's a lethal catch and shooter. But Garland, when you give him the full keys to the offense, has generated a 126 offensive rating without Donovan Mitchell. So, like, we are talking about a dude who is generating special offensive results. He is one of the absolute best pick and roll creators in basketball today. 90th percentile efficiency there. Maybe the best ball handler in the game right now. His hesitation move is the single nastiest dribble move in basketball today. He can stress defenses with his Nash dribbling in a way that is really unique. I mean, it's just an absolute weapon for him. And then he's also like an out-of-this-world shot maker. He makes 57% of his floaters. That is insane. He's a 41% three-point shooter who is elite as a pull-up shooter. So he's just creating elite efficiency offense for himself, and then he's also a brilliant playmaker while being a low turnover guy. I just think his combination of handle, quickness, floater touch, pull-up shooting, playmaking, like being so elite at all of those traits, nobody in the league quite has that entire combination in the way that he does. And you mentioned, I mean, he's dominant off handoffs. He's been a really efficient isolation creator. He is a really good off-ball player, which to me just makes him like basically the dream offensive guard. He's not perfect because he is still a small guy, doesn't get to the rim at a super high rate, although he is able to counter that with the fact that he makes floaters at the rate that Cade makes layups. That's no hate. I mean, that's literally just a fact. He's that good at floaters. And he doesn't get to the line at a high rate. So those are a couple areas where bigger, more athletic, stronger guys do have an advantage over him. But that doesn't impede him from being elite scorer, elite playmaker, elite efficiency, doing it with another lead guard archetype like Mitchell or on his own. And so then the struggle with him is just that although he's one of the elite offensive players in basketball, in the biggest matchup for Cleveland, he is the problem that they have to solve with his defense. That's why I can't have him higher than this, but he's that great offensively. And when you are that great offensively as a guard, you can just have such a monstrous impact on one side of the ball that I can live with the defensive issues. It's not ideal, but Garland is one of those dudes offensively, which is why I think he's got to be in your top 25. I have him at number 22.
I think so too, and I think if detractors are going to do it, it would be an anti-defense argument. Then I think it would be that you think the Cavs' overall talent is too good, but I just don't know how you can look at the offensive results he's generated without the other stars on the floor and still have that sentiment. Yeah. I mean, or, you know, maybe there's a bad taste in your mouth from last year, but I'm so totally fine with chalking that up to, you know, the diet change and the broken jaw and the losing weight and just, you know, his body not being in tip-top condition. I think that has way more to do with the Garland that we saw last year versus this guy. I think this is a much better basketball player, and I don't know. I'm Garland is the guy I think in my rankings that has jumped more than anybody else from last year to this year. Like if you had asked me last
Gotta
year,
be up there.
Garland versus Maxey, I would have no-brainer have told you that I was going to taste Tyrese Maxey, and Maxey's not on my list. I love Tyrese Maxey. I think
mean,
Garland.
his teammate Mobley, though, he's right there with him.
That's
He's
fair.
also taking a
That's
bit of a
actually
lead.
fair. But I've always been a little bit higher. You know what I mean? I was. I guess I was a little less confident in Garland getting back to this level, and
Oh, I agree with that.
so that's why I think him or Mobley are both good shouts for guys that have climbed the most in my player rankings since last year.
Great shout, and I mean, I feel terrible about how I felt about Darius Garland last year because, dude, I loved Garland as a prospect. I was such an advocate of his. I remember one of the first YouTube videos I ever made, like, I think it was early in his second season. I was like, this guy is going to be a star guard. He's going to be one of the best offensive guards in basketball. And then last year, it was just like regression. And I think now we can obviously see all the external circumstances that contributed to that I just think I undersold because it was a rough regular season. It was a rough postseason. And I am so happy that he has bounced back in the way that he has and improved to the point where we're talking about him as a top 25 guy. In my number 25 spot, I have a guy who's similar to Garland, is one of the best offensive players in basketball and one of the worst defensive players on this list. I think his defensive limitations are more costly than Garland's, though, because of the position that he plays. I have Karl-Anthony Towns here. And if I had to guess, a lot of people would probably think that this is too low for Cat, which is a bit ironic just because, Logan, was there a bigger Cat advocate on the planet last year than yours truly?
You were everybody bailed, everybody jumped off the bandwagon. You did not.
I'm a Cat truther, dude. I just think his offensive value has been unlocked to its peak in New York, which is incredible. I also think that his defensive issues have become more costly in that new situation playing the center. So I think the public discourse is very different about Cat because his offensive production has gone up a level from what it was last year. I actually don't feel different about him as a player really at all. In fact, I think I feel a little bit worse about his defense than I did last year because I thought he was able to be a solid defender at the 4 in Minnesota in that system alongside Gobert. But he is the second best offensive center in the NBA today. Because, again, I don't know what to do with Embiid. AD isn't a center anymore. He's going to play the 4. But I think the Cat is a better offensive player than Anthony Davis. I mean, he is a complete monster. He's giving you 24, 13, and 3 on over 63% true shooting. He's the best shooting big on the planet, has been for a long while, but 93rd percentile spot up big. You cannot leave him. 79th percentile roll man, super effective as a popper. And he's a very good mismatch attacker. He's not perfect there. If you have a feisty wing with a lower center of gravity, they can make him uncomfortable maybe as a handler. And sometimes he likes to initiate his isolations all the way from the 3-point line, and then he can over dribble and get himself into a little bit of trouble and maybe turn it over or commit an offensive foul, although his turnovers are down this year. But he's still a very effective isolation player. He's a very effective post-up player. He's a gifted passer, I think has always been an underrated trait of his. And he's got really good touch. So sometimes he has a drive that almost feels out of control, and then he sort of Euros in traffic into a runner, and it's just, I'm too big and my touch is too good. And he shoots 54% on hook shots as well. I do really like his back to the basket post-up game. So offensively, there's really nothing that anybody can do with Karl-Anthony Towns. But I do think he's the most costly defensive player of anybody we're going to talk about. Maybe there are worse defensive players. His own teammate, Jalen Brunson, Trae Young, Darius Garland, right? Those are all guys who are really bad defenders. But they're not in the position where you are trying to have them as your defensive anchor. And you can put Cat at the 4, but then again, you end up losing some of his offensive production. So how much better is he at the 4 than the 5? It's not a significant difference in my opinion. I do think Minnesota was probably the best situation for him, and he was the best for them. And obviously they're winning games right now, but I still think that their best chance was with their core last year. But he's a bad rim protector. People shoot 3% above their average at the rim versus Cat. That number's actually not that different from Bam, which is crazy, but that's a really, really bad number for a center. He's a really bad drop defender and just a low IQ defensive player. Makes a lot of mistakes, still way too foul prone on that end. Not good in space, not quick on his feet, not good playing up at the level, although I think he's better there than he is in a drop, like a deep drop. But just really, really hard to build a good team defense when he is your center. The Knicks have been able to put an average team defense out there, and I think that's why I can't have I mean, it's not like he single-handedly tanks your defense because they've done that with him and Brunson. They have really good wing defenders, and the result of that with the pluses and minuses is an average defense. So this feels right to me. I mean, he is incredibly difficult to contain on offense, but he is a real negative defensively at the most important defensive position. And when I compare him to a center who I have just barely above him on this list, who does not have the offensive production, who does not have the offensive ability of Cat right now, I think it's easier to build around the other guy because elite defense at the center position is so impactful, and negative defense at the center position is so impactful in the wrong direction. And that's the battle with Cat. I love the guy. I have him at number 25.
That's interesting. I have Cat at number 22, and
Okay.
I have a defensive big behind him that is nowhere nearly as offensively skilled, that laps him defensively. But the thing I thought about was I didn't hold against him that they're playing him at the 5. And I think that is where he's at his best offensively and where he is going to be at his worst defensively.
Mm-hmm.
But I just kind of took it as, well, just looking at Cat as the player, if I played him at the 4 spot, he can be solid. You know, I'm not asking him to be I don't want him to anchor the entirety of my defense because we're going to run into problems there. But I thought about it as, in an ideal situation, I don't think he's that big of a liability defensively if he was at the 4. And he is a special offensive player. I mean, the stuff he's doing this year is unreal.
It is.
24, 13, and 3 on 63% true shooting, 43% from behind the arc. He's been the best, the 7th best roll man scorer this year, 1.24 points per possession. He's been the number 12 spot up scorer in the league this season, 1.3 points per possession. And to be clear, for all of these guys, if I read out any of these play type numbers, I normally went with minimum 41 games played. You at least had to have played in half of the games in the year, and with a minimum of somewhere between 1 and 3 possessions. And if there are no minimum requirements, I'll tell you. But anytime I cite one of those stats, it'll be with a minimum traditionally applied. So I think you're getting one of the best offensive big men ever. I mean, one of the most skilled players of all time. I do think he's maximized offensively in the system, but the reason I was comfortable with having him higher is I didn't hold his defensive limitations positionally as hard against him because I think it's a byproduct of the position that they're playing him at. And
I understand that.
I think he's so overwhelmingly great offensively that I was also able to, because there's a certain player that I think you're going to have above him that I have below him.
Yeah.
That Cat is so much better than him offensively, even though that guy's grown, that I value Cat more than him.
I get it, and we'll have that conversation right now. And I see what you're saying about Cat at the 4 being a functional, capable defensive piece. We saw it last year. What I would say is, again, playing him alongside a traditional center who's going to muck up the spacing almost offsets the defensive gain that I get because it limits Cat's production. You look at what he did last year. Per 75 possessions with Rudy Gobert on the floor, he was only a 23-point guy on under 61% true shooting. Without Rudy, he was 27.5 points per 75 on 65% true shooting. His scoring volume goes up. His scoring efficiency goes up significantly. And that's the world that he's been playing in New York. And it's why we've seen him have his best offensive season. But obviously the defense has suffered. So he's just a tricky guy to build a great team around as much as I love him. He has all the offensive ability in the world and the offensive production and efficiency. It's all outstanding. He's trickier to build around than the big who we're dancing around, who I guess I'll just say I have in my number 24 spot. And that is Chet Holmgren. I love Chet.
Whoa!
That's not
Not
what
the
you
big
thought?
I was talking about.
Oh, look what happens to me when I assume, Logan. I make an ass out of you and me. Who are you talking about? Oh my God, are you talking about E-Mobes? Are you talking about the Mobley Meister? My true beloved? He
No.
clears cat. Oh. Oh, I know who you're talking about now. Okay. I see what you're saying.
No, wait, I
Yeah,
also
that
have...
guy's a hell of an
I
offense
have-
player. Okay, you're talking about Porzingis, right? I just
Oh
actually
my
want to be clear.
God,
at this
dude, is
point.
this guy not on your list, bro? I'm
Oh, no,
losing
I know who
it.
you're talking about now. I know who you're talking
No,
about
you
now.
don't. No,
I do. Jaren Jackson Jr. is who you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I got there eventually. Yeah, I do have him higher. I mean,
Do you have
Jaren
him
Jackson
above
Jr. is a
Chet?
monster offensively. I'm not telling you anything, bro.
Over cheddar cheese.
I mean, Triple J is a problem as a scorer. I'm just going to say it right now, buddy. My list, we're not getting to Triple J this episode.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa.
But anyways, I'm just going to talk about Chet now in my 24 spot, who is one of the hardest players to rank on this list because we only have 22 games of him this year. But you know I'm a believer in Chet. And the production per 36, still very impressive. 20 points, 11 boards, 2.5 assists with 3.5 blocks per game. And that is where Chet has top tier on the planet value because of all of the guys who we're going to talk about today on my list. Like the two Oklahoma City guys, probably going to have the least impressive, gaudy offensive numbers, but I think that they are by far the two most impactful defensive players on my list in the 21 through 30 range. And I do want to hammer that home with J-Dub. I mean, that's a big reason that he's on my list. He is that great, that impactful defensively. He was the anchor of a top 3 relative defense in NBA history with Chet gone for most of the year. Like, that is insane. And their talent in totality is incredible, of course, but J-Dub was the best guy in Chet's absence. But now Chet's back, baby, and he's a top 3 defender alive. And I tweeted this out today, dude. My dreams are all coming true. The top 3 defenders on the planet today are Wemby, which I think a lot of people would have called, but then it's Chet and it's Mobley. And I called all 3 of these guys generational defensive talents when they were prospects. And maybe people would say, well, you can't have 3 generational talents in a generation. And I would say, well, if they're all the best defensive prospects since Anthony Davis, maybe we just have a crazy stacked defensive generation. And that's what's happening right now. The 3 best defenders on the planet are from 3 consecutive draft classes, and they're all 21 to 23 years old. That's never happened.
Would you put Klingon in that top 5?
As a defender on the planet right now?
No, obviously. as a defensive prospect in recent memory.
Oh, Klingon's great. These guys are all clear, and the reason is that their mobility is so outstanding. I mean, Klingon is a pure rim protector, absolutely dominant. But
you would put him closer to that Kessler archetype.
100%, 100%. I think what makes Mobley so special is his elite switchability. What makes Chet so special is his god-tier rim protection, while also being quite switchable and really, really capable of guarding in space and on the perimeter. But he is very arguably the best rim protector in the game right now. People shoot 19% below their average at the rim.
Number 1 in the league. It's number 1
Number 1 in the league by far. Second best is 14%. I've never seen 19%, man. That is an unprecedented differential. And like, I just want everybody to let that soak in for a second. You got to understand what that does to an offense. If when one dude is on the floor and he's protecting the rim, you are shooting 40 to 45% at the rim. Those have been the most valuable, most efficient shots throughout NBA history. Chet makes them inefficient shots. That is unbelievably valuable. And he's, again, blocking 3.5 shots per 36 minutes. I think Wemby is the best deterrent in the NBA today because he is so massive. He's 7'4" with an 8-foot wingspan. But I actually think if you challenge him at the rim, Chet is the best rim protector. I think that his timing, his verticality, his ability to target the ball while still having incredible size and length, like, it's the best in the league. And that's why you see that absolutely insane differential. He also is really good guarding in space. And some people said coming into the league, oh, Chet's going to get bullied. Not when you're as long as he is and as good a shot blocker as he is. Like, he's been elite guarding both isolations and post-ups. Across those 2 play types combined, players average 0.6 points per on-ball, one-on-one possession targeting Chet Holmgren. I mean, that is an insanely low number. That puts Chet like above the 90th percentile. And obviously that is very secondary in terms of his defensive value to what he does as that unbelievable rim protector. So that just makes him so versatile defensively. We've seen him kill you at the 4 and at the 5, dominates defensively no matter what. And offensively, his versatility is absurd. The reason I can't have him higher than this, as much as I love the guy, is that I would need to see him be more consistent offensively. But the highs are so high there, and he has all of the ability in the world, and this is why I think Chet is probably going to eventually be a top 5 player in this sport. So many special traits for a center offensively. He's a really good shooter. As a popper, as a trailer in transition, he's a weapon. As a spot-up guy. And it's not the most consistent, but I do really believe in his three-point shot, and he's like 37% in his career, and I think has actually improved his mechanics this year, sped up his release a little bit. But he's also gotten better as a ball handler, and as a driver, he's gotten more comfortable and as aggressive. He started getting to the line more, which is such an efficient source of offense. He's gotten better from mid-range. He's gotten better at attacking from the nail. Set a down screen for him. He curls around. He can threaten you with the mid-range jumper. He can attack off the bounce. He can beat slower-footed bigs there, and that's where he's a problem, man. You got to find somebody who's big and quick enough to guard Chet, and there's not a lot of centers who are nearly as quick as Chet Holmgren off the bounce with a head of steam. He's a good finisher off the roll. He's a massive target there, and even though the guy's skinny as can be, he does not fear physicality. He's aggressive as a finisher in the paint. So we've seen such impressive stretches from him offensively. You think about the Celtics game the other night where he was just phenomenal offensively, so versatile, killing it with Hartenstein in the double big lineups. And then you think about how he started the year. I'm betting on him being close to what he was offensively at the start of this year if you get him healthy for an extended stretch and you let him build a rhythm, because he's coming back from a major injury. And I still think that he's been playing well offensively, but he hasn't been as consistent as he was early in the year. And he still does have areas where he needs to improve. He needs to be better as a mismatch attacker. I think that comes with adding strength and physicality. The shooting consistency is important, although I do believe in him there ultimately. And I think aggression is probably just the biggest thing. He needs to go out there with a scorer's mentality, be aggressive with his touches, and he just has so much ability. He's really hard to stop. So I compare him to Cat. It's just easier to build a championship team with Chet as my second best player than it is with Cat. Even this current version of Chet, who I think is going to get way better, because this current version of Chet is a really good offensive player who per 36 is giving me his efficient 20 and 11, and I think can do that in a playoff run. And then he's also going to be the best rim protector alive and anchor a historic defense as the best guy. I want that more than the incredibly gifted offensive center who is as much of a defensive liability as Cat.
Yeah, I have Chet up at 21.
I love it.
I also have him above Cat, but I have both of them above Triple J. I'll get to that in a second.
You're low on Triple J.
Yeah, I just think that there are things that you can exploit with him, and I don't like Triple J as much defensively as I like Chet, and I don't like Triple J as much offensively as I like Cat. And he's improved immensely offensively to where he was so flawed, but I still do worry about him in a playoff setting when I'm going to need him to make quick decisions, when I think there are things that you can counter him with. He's not as good of a rebounder as either of these guys. And just back on Chet, for one, the reason I have him so high is I am confident that he's going to break through, whether it's this year or however soon. I think his offensive game is he's going to pop, and he's going to pop in a big way.
I 100% agree with that. I'm just looking at this year, though, this version of Chet.
Yeah, I just think it could be sooner
be higher
than
on his future.
I just think it could be sooner than we realize. I think it could maybe be this playoff run where we see Chet
disagree.
pop. And he's already so talented. It's not a question of ability. It's like you said, when he is fully confident, when he's fully aggressive. The most ridiculous number I think I found about Chet when we were doing research for this, they have a 102.9 defensive rating with Chet and no Hartenstein. Hartenstein, no Chet, it's 3.9 points higher, which is just so ridiculous to me. They're both great defenses, but that big of a gap when it's they're both great defensive centers, but Chet has some of the best instincts I've ever seen, and you'll see this with certain guys in the league, but it's such a rare trait where Chet will go for a block or he'll go for something on, say, the right side of the rim, and they go to the left side, and he's still able to recover and turn his head and put his hand in the exact spot it needs to be to block a shot, like almost blind. His instincts are next level. He is one of the best defensive players on the planet, one of the best rim protectors on the planet immediately. And I think, like I said, his offensive game is going to pop. So I'm fully comfortable having him already up at 21. As for my number 24 guy, because he is a former defensive player of the year, he's gotten so much better in so many areas. Triple J is the number 5 post scorer in the NBA this season. He's the number 16 roll man scorer. He's also the number 19 transition scorer in the league. And
top 15 isolation, yeah.
Yeah, and we're talking about the guys with the best rim protection numbers. Chet is the best with no minimums. When you apply minimums like I was talking about earlier, Triple J is number 2. He holds guys 13.8% below their field goal percentage inside 6 feet. And so he is bringing you the best of both worlds. He's bringing you great scoring. He's bringing you elite defense. My issue is just needing to see it fully translate. And I've got a sour taste in my mouth from the last time we saw Triple J on a playoff stage against the Lakers. I think he is a completely different basketball player than he once was. But I do worry about it all fully coming together. I'm more confident than I've ever been about it fully translating, but I'm still a little bit skeptical, and I think there are some big flaws. You always talk about his playmaking limitations. I don't think he's a great rebounder, but he is one hell of a defensive player. It's just, I don't know, man. I need to see it. And it's kind of hard because I've painted myself into a corner where I have to argue that Cat's sole offensive game outpaces Triple J on both sides. I have to argue Chet basically defensively over the two-way ability I'm getting with Triple J, but I just prefer both of those guys to Triple J right now, and I guess it's my number one. Like, Chet is my defensive number one. Cat is my offensive number one if that was the situation. I know Triple J can be a defensive number one, but I'm still just a little bit skeptical about his offensive game fully translating. But this could be the year. I've been skeptical about the Grizzlies all year long. I'm not going to try to pretend like I haven't. Triple J could very well prove me wrong in the playoffs this year. And honestly, I'm rooting for it. I'd like to see it happen. But until I see it happen, I think he's going to be in this area, somewhere between 21 and 24 in this range. I would struggle to have him higher.
This is a little low for Triple J, in my opinion. Now, do I think that Chet is going to be better than Triple J? Absolutely. I think he has a different ceiling on both sides of the ball, honestly. And Triple J is a phenomenal defender. He's not Chet defensively, but he is a top 10 defender on the planet. He is one of the front runners for Defensive Player of the Year. He is an elite rim protector and a destructive roamer and very, very switchable as a big. So he brings you elite value on that end, where I think that he is just a level above Chet right now is as a scorer. I mean, this is a guy who has been the number 1 scorer for a good offense this year. This is a guy who has led the Grizzlies to better offensive results when he's out there without Ja than vice versa. Like, Triple J has just reached that point where his combination of strength and touch is so great that basically nobody can deal with him as a scorer in single coverage. I mean, he's been dominant as a post-up player. He's been dominant as an isolation player. His handle obviously has progressed too, but he's got one of the best runners in basketball. He's got one of the best hook shots in basketball. He is the most ambidextrous finisher when you're talking about the right and the left hand in basketball. So efficient, going either way with those touch shots, and he is a good three-point shooter. So I have questions for sure about his passing. That's the big concern for me with Triple J, because I've mentioned these numbers before, but Triple J is a very efficient post-up scorer, 72nd percentile. You send a hard double at him, and the points per possession that he generates in that situation ranks in the 0th percentile. Now, it's not over a big sample size, but he turns the ball over 27% of the time. He's just got really bad vision as a passer, and he's got really bad accuracy as a passer. So, yeah, if you double the shit out of him, you're going to give him trouble. The thing is, nobody's doubling Chet. Nobody's all that worried about Chet as a mismatch attacker right now. Like, we're just talking about different level of defensive attentions. Teams could game plan for Triple J. He could be the primary target for Memphis's offense, like the guy you're worrying about more than Ja offensively. That's not happening with Chet. Teams are more worried about Shea. They're probably going to be more worried about J-Dub offensively. So I just think it's a totally different level of scoring ability and attention that Triple J has shown this year. That's why I do have him higher than this, but I worry about the passing. He's not the level of defender that Chet is. You do have the issues with him of, okay, offensively, you want him to be your center in this super spaced out environment, but defensively, you want him to be your 4 where somebody else can anchor the glass and be that high-end drop defender and post defender, which Triple J isn't really. But he's just so damn good at the end of the day on both sides of the ball that I have him higher than this. I think that considering positional value, the defensive gap with him versus Cat exceeds the offensive gap. Triple J scoring 28 points per 36 minutes on 60% true shooting. That's impressive. That is elite scoring value.
I only have one guy left on my list.
Whoa. How the heck did that happen? Okay, well, I have a couple guys left. I had Chet at number 24. Who's in your 23 spot?
Well, this is the last guy that I have anything to say about because we've already talked about my 22 and 21. I don't know if he's going to appear on your list, and I definitely considered this guy higher. I have Tyrese Haliburton.
He's in the next episode for me.
Got you. Yeah, I mean, there's other guys with better two-way value, and that applies to some of the guys who are on my next list. The bigger thing is the reliable scoring that I get from other players that are higher on my list. Now, it's not a catch-all, but for a lot of the guards that are higher than Tyrese, there's just a different level of confidence I have in them scoring the ball in more versatile ways on a big stage. And so while necessarily I would rather have Tyrese as my number 1, I might rather prefer those guys as my number 2. And that's why I went with them, because I think Tyree gives you such a high baseline for how good your offense is going to be. Like, it's remarkable how efficient the guy is with his shots, with his touch, just in general. Like, efficient's the word I'd use for Tyrese. Is he doesn't make mistakes. He doesn't make bad decisions. Tyrese is a genius. But he can be passive. You can sometimes wish that he would take more shots or he would be more aggressive. Like, there's stretches in this year where, you know, he's not being as aggressive. There's stretches in the playoffs last year. He's been better recently, but there are stretches where you just want him to exert himself on the game a little more, where with some of these more veteran guards, these more experienced players, they know when they need to take over. They know when they need to serve buckets, and I can trust them. That being said, though, as a number 1, there's not many guys I would take above Tyrese Haliburton as my engine and my guy. So that's the argument I would hear for him being higher, because he is awesome as an offensive number 1, and I've always loved Tyrese from when he was drafted to Sacramento, from when he was at Iowa State in the pre-draft process. He is so fundamentally unselfish. He empowers everybody in Indiana to play team basketball, to play hard. There's something about playing with guys like that you know you're going to get fed. You know you're going to eat, and it makes you want to play harder for those guys. And Tyrese is one of those guys that just amplifies players around him and encourages them to play their best brand of basketball. He's such a smart passer, such a smart and unselfish playmaker. He's at 19-4-9 this year on 61% true shooting. That's not excluding any down part of the year. That's including the down start to the year he had, and that's where he's at now.
When he was hurt, when his back was fucking with him.
Exactly. With 1.5 steals per game and under 2 turnovers per game, he's the 4th best pick and roll ball handler scorer in the league. He is an 85th percentile spot-up player, and he's the number 13 scorer out of handoffs in basketball this year. The guy is going to generate elite offense. He's not a perfect defensive player. He gives effort on that end. Bigger, stronger guys can beat him up a little bit on that end. But for the most part, for everybody that's above him on my list, they're either better and more trustworthy scorers that I prefer in a playoff setting, or they're better two-way players. It's not a catch-all for everybody, but that's normally the archetype that I favored for guys above Tyrese. But I love Tyrese's game, and I would not argue with anybody if they had him higher, because I just think he is going to lead you to having a great offense. And in a different way, too, because people would argue Trae, people would argue Ja, people would argue Cade. I get it. The numbers aren't going to pop out the page at you, but I encourage you to look at the offensive results and what he has done year in, year out with this Pacers team. It's really, really special stuff, and I just love Haliburton.
I love him too, man, which is why I got him in my top 20. And I think that he is an offensive number one for an elite offense. Now, he's not necessarily going to be your number one scorer, but obviously he's the offensive engine behind elite team offense. We saw it last year. They were on a historic pace before they added Siakam. And then he led the number one playoff offense. This year, their offense has transformed with him on the floor compared to often. He's got a +8 offensive on-off differential. He just epitomizes efficiency. He epitomizes playing basketball the right way, in my opinion, making the most out of every advantage that he creates. And he has a number of elite traits that I think get underrated. Like, he is an elite pull-up three-point shooter. That is an A-plus weapon. He has an elite floater. He shoots 54% in the paint outside the restricted area from that floater range. And then he's an incredible passer at his size. He has so many passing angles available to him. He's extremely selfless. And I think he is the best decision maker in the NBA today. I think he is incredibly unique in his ability to still create really high-end advantages and do it without turning the ball over. He has a historic assist-to-turnover ratio this year. He never takes bad shots. Like, he makes the right decision every time down. And so he has these elite scoring traits and he has these elite passing traits, and whatever you give him, he's going to take. If it's the pull-up three, he'll take it and kill you with that. If it's the floater, he'll take it and kill you with that. If it's hitting the popper versus drop coverage, that's what he'll do. If it's hitting a skip pass when you send two to the ball or bring the big up to the level, that's what he'll do. Like, he just dissects you no matter what. And then he is the best hit ahead and best transition passer in basketball. So he's always going to get you out playing with pace, getting easy offense in transition. He's one of the best off-ball point guards in basketball as an elite spot-up shooter. The ball never sticks to him, right? He'll get off it quickly to create an advantage, find an open guy, and then if it ends up being that, okay, we're playing the drive and kick game, they closed out on one guy, swing pass, now we got to make one more swing pass. Guess who's relocated and is an elite shooter? It's Tyrese Haliburton. Like, he just does all of the things possible to enhance elite team offense that a lot of these other guys don't do in the same way. Like, frankly, I don't think that Cade and Trae are that close to Hallie as offensive players when Hallie is right, as he has been for the better part of 50 games now. And some of it is the selflessness. Some of it is the off-ball value. Some of it is a guy like Trae is more prone to sort of strangling the pace, whereas Hallie, it's always going to be go, go, go. Let's get out and run. Let's make quick decisions. I just love the guy offensively. And he's one of those guys who is so impactful offensively and not really a liability defensively. Not a good defender, certainly, but 6'5", reasonably long, good hands, decently active defensively. Like, it's not a Garland where I'm worried about him getting hunted. Yeah, I think he's a top 20 guy. I mean, I love my elite defensive bigs who are good offensive players, and I've got a lot of those guys in my top 25 range, but if you can make me an elite offense in a number of different situations like Hallie can, I value that so much. And I looked at like some of the offensive on-off stuff for him, or the with or without you combinations. And if you have him out there without Siakam over the last 2 years, Pacers have a 123 offensive rating. When Hallie's out there without Andrew Nembhard, they have a 123 offensive rating. When he's out there without Miles Turner, they have a 120 offensive rating. That is not reciprocated when you take Hallie off the floor. There's a significant drop-off when he's off the floor. I love the man. He produces elite offensive results. I'm so happy that he's back. I'm happy that we vouched for our guy, Drew from Pick a Side, Riv from Pick a Side. I'm looking at you. They were talking shit about an injured man, and that man is back, and he's a bad man, and he's still one of the more underrated players in basketball because he is phenomenal.
And we never switched up.
No, man. He was hurt. He was hurt. You could see that he was hurt. We had to go into the trenches. That was one of the fiercer battles that I've fought. And we came out on top. LaMelo Ball over Hallie. Okay, Drew.
That's ridiculous, man.
Get serious, bro. I'm wondering if you have this guy on your list. I don't know if maybe injuries kept him off, or if you have him higher. I have Kyrie Irving at number 23.
Yeah, I got Kyrie on my list.
Okay, all right. That's cool. I love Kyrie, man. I mean, he's giving you 25, 5, and 5 on over 59% true shooting this year, and still one of the purest buckets in basketball. 90th percentile pick and roll scorer, 86th percentile isolation scorer, 95th percentile spot up scorer. He's still quick for his age. At least he was pre-injury, and just hope he comes back healthy, because I'm just evaluating the version of Kyrie that we saw this year. I don't know exactly what he'll look like when he comes back, but still a really good finisher when he gets to the rim, and just an absurd ball handler, probably the best we've ever seen there. His footwork, his balance, and his shot making is just ungodly, man. And he's also a super low turnover player. So what I love so much about Kyrie is the portability of his offensive skill set and the efficiency of it, not just literally in terms of scoring efficiency where he's good, but he's not like overwhelming. He's not going to get to the line a ton. He's not going to get to the rim a ton. He's not a big guy with a ton of strength, size advantages. But what I mean by that is just his decisiveness, his ability to dominate away from the ball and on ball. He's just like the perfect number 2 offensively. And even though he's not a high-end playmaker, and that's a limitation of his, when I compare him to some of the guys who I have below him, who are higher usage, low efficiency guys, higher turnover, better passers with bigger box scores like a Cade or like a Trae, like I just prefer Kyrie's scoring ability, his offensive versatility, and the ease of fit. I feel like I can put Kyrie in any situation as my offensive number 2, and he's going to be one of the best that there is. And he's legitimately a competitive defender. So I considered putting him above Garland, who I have one spot higher because of that. I ended up giving Garland the nod just because, like, Garland is one of those great playmakers who's also super efficient as a scorer and who's also really good off ball. Like, I do think offensively he's a level above a Cade or Trae, like I was just talking about. But Kyrie's right there with Garland as an overall player for me. And you saw his impact this year, man. I mean, they had that dude in hell. Luka was hurt. Then they traded him. AD had 3 glorious quarters. Then he was hurt. And the Mavs were 28-22 when Kyrie played. They were 16-14 when he played without Luka. And they're 5-14 without Kyrie in the lineup this year. So, yeah, he's not built to be an offensive number 1 like a Haliburton is, like a couple of the guys who I have above him are. He's not a high-impact two-way guy, but my God, he can still get a bucket and do so in a way that I think makes any offense better.
Yeah, I have Kyrie in my 20 spot, and the reason that I gave him the nod over a guy like Haliburton is the veteran poise that I get with Kyrie. Haliburton can disappear. Haliburton did that in the playoffs last year. I don't necessarily anticipate that happening again. That being said, I never have to worry about that with Kyrie. He's going to pick his spots. He's going to pick his spots smartly, and he can do it in every way. As your number 1, as your number 2, cutting off ball, spotting up, as your lead ball handler. That was the distinction that I made between a Hallie and a Garland, where I could see them having better games on a game-to-game basis, but I feel like Kyrie's baseline is just higher, and I don't have to worry about him fading in and out of basketball games.
I have to push back. On that. I think that that's a little bit of altering history. I think that Kyrie absolutely had stretches where he disappeared in the playoff run last year, and Tyrese Haliburton led the number 1 playoff offense. Were there games where I wanted Hallie to be more aggressive as a scorer? Sure. But if he's giving you 10 points in one game, he's still going to have a pronounced offensive impact on the game with his pace, with his playmaking. But there were games where Kyrie was just overwhelmed by really good perimeter defenders and his shot making was off. I mean, against Boston, he was
both
terrible.
Of these guys can be
terrible.
off, but Haliburton is going to disappear some games. Kyrie is going to take his shots.
You want your guy to take his shots and miss shots compared to a guy who's creating good shots for his teammates but isn't necessarily taking and missing shots himself?
That's a gross mischaracterization of my argument, but thank you for putting words in my mouth.
That's the difference between the two of them last year. Like, if you're looking at the box score, Kyrie had games where he would go 5 for 19. Hallie had games where he wasn't aggressive as a scorer, which I agree. I want to see him be aggressive, but he's still creating better shots for his teammates than Kyrie.
I want the guy who gives me the veteran poise, who's more aggressive on a consistent basis. Hallie would have games where I would be frustrated at his lack of attempts. Kyrie's going to continue fighting and clawing. And like I said, I think Hallie, Carson, I agree with you. Haliburton is the guy I would rather have as a number one, but I think Kyrie's more malleable as a number one or a number two, depending on where you need him to be. And I just don't think Kyrie has that same propensity to fade away like Hallie does in certain games.
I just don't agree. I also think, there were games where Kyrie didn't have scoring volume, not to be fair, even in terms of attempts. That mostly came against OKC, and they were playing a super aggressive coverage, blitzing every single ball screen, and so they were trying to force the ball out of his hands.
He was also in a different role last year, where, if Luka's taking over, sometimes he doesn't even need to produce.
I think that there is such a big gap between them as playmakers. Like, Hallie can carry you to elite offense.
Is there a gap between them as scorers?
I think there's a gap between them as scorers. I think it's outweighed by the gap as playmakers.
I think Kyrie's the better scorer right now.
Kyrie is the better scorer. 100%. But you put the ball in Hallie's hands, he can lead you to be a historic offense last year. That's what he did before he had an all-star teammate. Kyrie cannot do that. And maybe it would be different if Hallie weren't also awesome off ball, but he is also awesome off ball. So that's the thing for me. I think Kyrie's really good. There is an inconsistency that comes with his reliance on shot making, difficult shot making at times. And we saw, Boston just tried to make him a one-on-one scorer against elite perimeter defenders, and he really, really struggled in that matchup. I think that Hallie is the more elite offensive player with his elite playmaking, and I think that the results that he's produced for his team reflect that. In my number 21 spot, though, Logan, because you have discussed everybody on your list, right? Who's in your 21 spot?
Chet.
Okay, so you have Chet. I have another big man who I think is underrated. I have Kristaps Porzingis here. I'm extremely high on KP. I've been very vocal about that. The guy is just a monster. He's averaging almost 25 points per 75 possessions this year on 61% true shooting. He is the best pick and pop big in the league today with his size, his range, and the fact that he's shooting over 44% on pick and pop threes. He is the second best post scorer in the league today after only Nikola Jokic. Over the last 2 years, KP has averaged 1.24 points per post up. That's the best of any volume post up player.
Are you looking at the last 2 seasons? Because he's number one this year.
And he was number one last year. So I'm saying he has been the most efficient in both these years. I just think Jokic is still a better post scorer. I think that that's pretty clear. It's a different level of defensive attention that they're dealing with. But KP gets to the line at a really high rate off post-ups. He's just gotten so much more comfortable playing with physicality. He is such an elite shot maker on turnarounds and face-ups. Like, nobody can really do much of anything with him at his size, with his skill. And he's a top 5 rim protector in the league today. He holds opposing players more than 14% below their average at the rim. That's the second best mark in basketball, only to Chet Holmgren, who we talked about. So, best pick and pop big, second best post scorer, top 5 rim protector. Those are 3 of the most valuable traits in a big man. He is top tier at all of them. So that's why I think he's probably the most underrated player in the league today. His offensive game is lean. He doesn't demand a ton of touches, but it is destructive. He can fit in anywhere and just break the game with his shooting from beyond the arc, with his mismatch attacking offensively, and he makes any basketball team way better because of that. So, as I've said many times before, I do think he's clearly the Celtics' second best player. I do think his value is more unique than Jalen. I think he's the more impactful two-way guy. I think he's more efficient. I think he's such a seamless fit in so many different spots. And I think he's more unstoppable when he's at his best and when he's really going and asserting himself with volume. And I have him as my number 21 player in the NBA. I just think he misses games. He doesn't always play the heaviest minutes. Injuries are for sure a real thing, but I'm evaluating these dudes in a vacuum. I'm just saying, how good are you when you're healthy? And I think that KP is one of the best bigs on the planet when he's healthy. And I'm glad to see that he's back from his sickness because he had a really good return to action. And I just wanted to remind everybody what a monster he is. Because if the Celtics want to repeat, they need KP. And they need monster KP. And if he's healthy, I think they'll get a very, very good KP.
Yeah, I've got Porzingis at number 19. I think he has to be on the list. He's also the number 3 pick and roll scorer as a roll man this season. He's just a walking mismatch. And if you take away those minimum requirements I was talking about earlier, he's got the number 2 defensive field goal percentage inside 6 feet, nearly 15% below what players are traditionally shooting at the rim. He's just a matchup problem. And so I've got him higher just because I think he does we're talking about the split, right? Triple J brings me this. All right, well, Chet brings me this. All right, well, Karl-Anthony Towns brings me this. With Kristaps Porzingis, he brings you everything. He brings you elite rim protection. He brings you a decent level of switchability. He brings you a pretty high level of post defense, I think, as well. Like, his length is just so problematic. I mean, last year's finals is so imprinted in my brain. Like,
Broke
20
in
minutes
for
a night.
20 minutes and destroyed the series.
Dude, I mean, he breaks it wide open.
Then he got hurt.
Wreaking havoc as a rim protector, knocking down every mid-range shot, attacking mismatches in the post. He is a walking problem.
Yeah,
Kristaps Porzingis. And so that's why he's higher on this list. And I just think you get the perfect union of all the worlds I was just talking about, where I get the veteran poise of all these players, where he understands his role to a T and understands what is expected of him. It's not like Chet, where some nights he's going to be aggressive and some nights he's not. KP knows what he needs to do and is going to deliver that. He provides me elite rim protection no matter what. Again, it's that veteran presence. And those, in my opinion, at the position he plays, are two of the most valuable things that you can bring to the table at that position. Floor spacing, reliable scoring, easy offense, and elite rim protection and defense. I still think KP's the man, and I think because of his availability concerns, he gets overly criticized. And to me, it's different than an Embiid or a Kawhi. One, I think their availability issues are more of a concern. But even without that, it's like Embiid can disappear sometimes if his jump shot is off. I know KP's going to get to his bread and butter spots at will. All right, my jumper's not hitting. All right, well, I'm going to get to the low block. Effort is not a concern. I just think KP is so reliable when he is available. That maybe he doesn't have the ceiling that those two guys can impact, but he's got the floor, and his floor is so damn valuable.
I mean, I love KP. I don't know about taking it to a place of comparing it to Kawhi and Embiid. I mean, those guys just so much better than KP at their peaks.
I don't know if Kawhi is that much better than KP right now.
I'm saying at their peaks. Like, if
right
you're talking
now.
about their history things.
Talking about right now.
I'm saying their peaks, not right now. Kawhi's not at his peak right now.
Well, I wasn't talking about their peak.
Okay, I see. You're saying just within the context of
I'm
this
confused.
list.
You're confusing me. I don't really know what you mean right now.
No, I thought you were saying when you're talking about this history of injury concerns that you viewed them differently because, like, Embiid would regress, and I would just say, well, Embiid's regressing from an infinitely higher point than KP. You're just talking about ranking them on this list and why you aren't as concerned about his injury
if you're
stuff.
confused, maybe the audience is confused. Let me elaborate.
Okay.
What I mean by that is, let's put ourselves in last season to make it perfectly clear. Last season, I mean on a game-to-game basis, Joel Embiid, if his jumper is off, can take his foot off the pedal and won't give me anything defensively, and can be lazy and can be slow. And if his jumper's off, is giving me nothing of value. I just feel completely differently with that with Porzingis, where...
Okay. So this is what I thought you were saying, and I totally disagree. I totally disagree that an average, or that there are games where Embiid
I think KP's
last year is giving you nothing defensively, and as if he isn't the entire focal point of the opposing defense, even if his jumper is off, he's drawing such overwhelming attention.
But KP is going
to, man, he averaged 35 a game last year.
KP's going to get to the low block. Embiid can settle. Like, KP's floor to me is...
KP's a third scoring option. It's
KP's
totally
floor is still
world.
higher to me than Embiid's. I think Embiid's floor is horrible.
I do not agree with that. I think that if you put Kristaps Porzingis with any of the versions of the Sixers that Embiid has struggled with in the playoffs in recent years, there would be a rude awakening for KP. And this is as the dude's like biggest fan in the world. I mean, you're talking about a guy who is, again, depending on what you think, their second or third best player, who is consistently their third leading scorer, versus a guy who was expected to score 35 a game on one end and be the lead defensive anchor on the other end.
I think Embiid's style of play opened himself up to having those fluctuations in performance.
I don't disagree. Like, I think he was too reliant on his jumper in general in the playoffs. I think his playmaking limitations were all real, but like we're talking about totally different stratospheres of players, man. We're talking about an MVP caliber guy, number one option, historic regular season scorer who defenses are singularly focused on stopping versus KP, who is going to be your second or third focal point of defensive attention. Like, I'm not really sure where Embiid even factors into this, to be honest. I don't see the relevance of comparing him to KP. We might as well compare Jupiter to, I don't know, the moon. I feel like we've gotten sidetracked here. I'm not really sure what the point of this is.
My original point was just about the availability, and I think people can kind of conflate KP's injuries to be on that level when I don't think they are. I think Embiid's injuries were always way more of a concern. I think Kawhi's injuries were way more. I think KP's an injury-prone guy, but like...
He is. I think they are a real concern. I just don't think that has any bearing on when he's healthy. I mean, he missed the majority of the playoffs last year. Like, he for sure gets banged up.
Well,
that's not what I'm
That's
ranking
my
here.
point. That is my point right there. Is Embiid's injuries can be so debilitating that even when he's available, he can struggle, and I think it limits his style of play. When KP is healthy and available, his style of play doesn't inherently change. He's always going to be valuable, no matter if his injuries are debilitating or not, because there's just things that you can't take away, if that makes sense. Like, I don't want to, because their roles are completely different. I think it would be asinine to try to compare KP, who is a third or fourth guy, to Embiid, who's number one. But my thing is
fourth. Let's not downplay the guy.
I'm saying depending on the game, depending on the game plan, depending on how the game is going, he could be your... I don't know why you're getting into that minutia. It's like if Derek White's having a great game, he's the number three. KP would be that's what I'm getting at. Anyway, I just think that Embiid's injuries could be more debilitating than KP's. When it's like when KP's on the floor, I kind of know what I'm getting. Embiid's kind of a coin toss. And maybe that has more to do with what we got out of Embiid this year, because I think Embiid's cooked long term. I think he's fucking done. I wouldn't have him in my... I look at Embiid like I look at Aaron fucking Rodgers. Like, I don't want him. The guy's hurt. The guy's not a good locker room guy. The guy's cooked. His career's done. I don't want anything to do with Embiid. I don't want anything to do with Kawhi either. I'm kind of over both of those guys.
I think Embiid this year is different because he wasn't playing well when he was on the court, and we literally don't know if he's ever going to play basketball again or if he'll look remotely the same. So I get what you're saying about this year, but I think that's very different from the historical context of Embiid, where you are talking about a guy who was a top 5 player and was then dealing with injury stuff. I really like KP. You really like KP. We're pretty aligned on this at the end of the day. We got him 2 spots apart. But my thing would just be his health concerns are not at the point where I'm like, I don't know who you are. That's where they are with Embiid now. That happened this year. They've always had major injury concerns.
I guess I've always
escalated this year.
I guess I've always kind of been there with Embiid.
But like you would have had Embiid as a top 30 player last year when he averaged 34 a game in the playoffs.
I guess.
Oh my God.
I've never been in on Embiid. I've never wanted him.
Neither have I. I've never been in on Embiid, but he just had one of the great regular seasons ever.
I could never rank him because he's always hurt when it matters.
But last year,
I could have omitted him. I could have omitted him.
Player. Well, that would have been a terrible take. That would have been a terrible take.
I could have done it because he's never healthy.
But he was healthy enough to still give the Knicks 34 a game, and we considered that still playoff dropping when he's on 60% of a knee.
And what did he give you in the fourth quarter?
Dude, you're acting like I'm some Embiid fan here. You know how I feel about Joel Embiid. I just think you're...
And you're acting like I haven't been a consistent Embiid hater.
Well, I guess that's the thing. I consider myself an Embiid critic. I feel like you're perhaps crossing some lines here when you're talking about last year Joel Embiid not being on your list for your top 30 guys.
I've just kind of been at this...
there.
I've kind of seen this coming for 3 to 4 years where... I don't know, man. I've never thought that Embiid was going to be healthy, and I've never been as high on him as anybody else has. Like, I think theoretical Embiid was always way better than actual Embiid.
Joel Embiid and James Harden, Domantas Sabonis.
They're on my shit list, and they're never getting
off. You got some guys on your shit list, man. You got some guys on your shit list. All right. Well, that was a ton of fun, man.
There's whale poo, and then there's those guys.
Oh, man. Oh, man. You're not afraid to say what you think, Logan, and I love that about you. Before we wrap things up, Logan, real quick, will you just read off your 30 through 21?
My pleasure. At number 30, I have Ja Morant. At 29, I have De'Aaron Fox. At 28, I have Jaylen Brown. At 27, I have Trae Young. At 26, I have Cade Cunningham. At 25, I have Darius Garland. At 24, I have Triple J. At 23, I have Tyrese Haliburton. At 22, I have Karl-Anthony Towns. And at 21, I have Chet Holmgren.
Okay, at number 30, I have Jalen Williams. Number 29, I have Domantas Sabonis. 28, Trae Young. 27, Cade Cunningham. 26, Jimmy Butler. 25, Karl-Anthony Towns. 24, Chet Holmgren. 23, Kyrie. 22, Darius Garland. And 21, Kristaps Porzingis. So there you have it, part one of our list. I thought that was great. I mean, I can't wait to get into the next one. I love talking about all these guys. Like I said, I've been fiending to do this for like a month or two, so I'm glad that we actually got into it. Top 20 starts on Wednesday. We'll do number 20 through 11, and then we will take a break on Friday if things go as planned, because we are hopefully going to have a very special guest, and then we would finish with the top 10 this coming Monday. But this is great. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys stay locked in for the rest of the list. That's all going to be on our YouTube channel, of course, as all of our full episodes are about the NBA and the NFL. But you can also listen to the pod across all audio platforms. You can follow us across social media, TikTok and Instagram at NerdSesh, Twitter at Nerd_Sesh to see clips from the show, graphics from the show, and all of our short-form trivia content. By the way, I should mention the video breakdown that I did on the Thunder Celtics game that I was mentioning last week. The copyright gods did ultimately accept my offering of Logan's body, and they did clear it. So kind of tanked it with the old algorithm. Maybe you haven't had it promoted to you. But if you want to check that out, that is on our channel. You can check out our merch if you want. That is linked at our link tree and at breakingt.com. And you can join our Discord if you want to chat with the gang and become part of our community over there. So with that, as always, appreciate you guys. I have been Carson Breber.
I have been Logan Camden.
And this was Nerd Sesh.